Upon returning from a romantic honeymoon with his mistress, the cheating husband rushed to the hospital front desk and asked, "Has my wife given birth yet?" The nurse looked at his fresh tan with utter disgust and quickly replied, "Your wife was discharged from the hospital with the baby 18 days ago, sir. I am Zuri, and I am 32 years old. I spent those 18 days executing the most flawless financial and legal exit strategy." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build a castle on the ashes. My water broke exactly 18 days ago. I was standing in the master bathroom of our upscale Atlanta home holding my husband Marcus' tablet. A calendar notification had illuminated the screen. It was an itinerary confirmation for a luxury overwater villa in the Maldives for two. The second guest was not me. It was Chloe, his 24-year-old junior analyst. Marcus had kissed my forehead that morning, claiming he was boarding an emergency flight to London to secure critical funding for his wealth management firm. Instead, he was taking his mistress on a tropical baby moon while his 9-month pregnant wife stayed behind. I did not scream. I did not throw the tablet against the marble tiles. I felt a sharp contraction rip through my abdomen, and I simply closed my eyes and breathed through the pain. I picked up my phone and called a luxury transport from my own company. I own an elite maternal wellness and postpartum concierge agency catering to the wealthiest families across Georgia. It is a business Marcus and his status-obsessed mother Sylvia always dismissed as glorified babysitting. They had absolutely no idea my glorified babysitting had quietly built a multi-million-dollar empire while Marcus was secretly drowning in debt, trying to maintain his image as a top-tier Morehouse graduate. I checked into a private VIP birthing suite under a strict privacy hold. I delivered a healthy, beautiful baby girl in total peace. While Marcus was sipping cocktails on a white sand beach thousands of miles away, I went to work from my hospital bed. I hired the most ruthless family law attorney in Atlanta. I removed every single dollar of my personal wealth from Marcus' firm. I triggered the morality clause in our prenuptial agreement. He had signed it 5 years ago without reading the fine print because his massive ego convinced him he would always be the primary breadwinner. For 18 days, I sat in my recovery suite nursing my newborn daughter and systematically dismantling my husband's entire existence. I did not shed a single tear over his betrayal. I only felt a cold, absolute clarity. Marcus believed I was a weak, dependent woman who would fall apart without his presence. He was about to learn that a mother protecting her child is the most ruthless force on earth. I coordinated with my legal team to execute the sale of our primary residence. The house had been purchased through a blind trust funded entirely by my business revenue. Marcus was legally just a tenant in my property, but his pride made him parade around as if he owned the ground we walked on. Today was the day he finally flew back from the Maldives. He drove straight from the airport to the hospital, carrying a cheap bouquet of pink roses, ready to play the role of the stressed but devoted new father who rushed back from Europe just in time. He marched up to the maternity ward desk, flashing his charismatic smile. When the nurse delivered the news that I had been gone for nearly 3 weeks, the color completely drained from his face. The bouquet slipped from his hand, hitting the linoleum floor. He panicked. He sprinted back to his car and sped toward our $1.5 million suburban home in the gated community his mother loved to brag about at her megachurch. He ran up the front steps and jammed his key into the mahogany lock, but it refused to turn. He jiggled it violently, cursing under his breath. He pounded his fists against the heavy wood, shouting my name and demanding I open the door. He assumed I was inside changing the locks out of postpartum hysteria. The door finally swung open, but I was not standing there. A white woman in yoga pants holding a small dog looked at him with sheer confusion and alarm. Marcus demanded to know what she was doing in his house and ordered her to get my attention immediately. The woman took a step back, crossing her arms defensively. She looked him up and down and said, "Who are you?" The owner sold this house to us for cash 2 weeks ago, and we just moved in, so you need to leave my porch before I call the police. Marcus stumbled backward, almost tripping over his own luxury luggage. His mind could not process the reality of the situation. The house was gone, his wife was gone, his newborn child was gone. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed my number again and again, but it went straight to a disconnected automated message. He had spent the last 2 weeks living a fantasy with a woman 10 years my junior, believing he could just slip back into his perfect life whenever it suited him. He had severely underestimated the woman he married. Standing on the sidewalk of a neighborhood he no longer belonged to, Marcus finally realized his perfect facade was crumbling. He frantically dialed his mother Sylvia, knowing she was the only person who would unconditionally protect him now. The real war was not going to be fought on a stranger front porch today. The real war was about to begin at the family dinner table, and I was already exactly 10 steps ahead. Marcus stood on the manicured sidewalk, his designer loafers sinking into the Georgia clay. His chest heaved as he frantically dialed the only person who had ever managed to fix his messes, Sylvia Washington, his mother. The formidable First Lady of Greater Grace Cathedral, a megachurch with a congregation of 20,000 and an offering plate that funded her custom Bentley. Sylvia answered on the second ring. Marcus spilled the entire story, his voice cracking like a disciplined child. He left out the mistress, of course. He framed it as a massive misunderstanding, a stressed husband needing a solitary retreat, and a hormonal wife acting out of sheer malice. Sylvia did not hesitate. She told him to come to the family estate immediately. She promised to summon Zuri and remind her of her place. 2 hours later, my phone vibrated with a text from Sylvia. It was not an invitation. It was a royal decree demanding my presence for a family dinner to resolve this embarrassing misunderstanding. I did not wear sweatpants. I did not show up with puffy eyes or a trembling lip. I dressed in a razor-sharp crimson blazer, stepped into my stilettos, and strapped my 18-day-old daughter into her car seat. When I arrived at Sylvia's sprawling mansion in Buckhead, I did not walk in alone. I was flanked by a private security guard named Malik, a towering man holding a thick leather briefcase containing every financial receipt of my marriage. I stepped into the formal dining room. The mahogany table was set with fine china and catered salmon, a perfectly curated stage for their brand of toxic superiority. The cast of characters was already assembled. Sylvia sat at the head of the table, her church hat replaced by a silk wrap radiating judgment. Marcus sat to her right, playing the role of the exhausted, victimized provider. Across from him sat my older sister Jada. Jada was the golden child, a corporate attorney who never missed an opportunity to display her degrees and remind everyone of her high billing rate. Beside Jada sat her white husband Brent, an arrogant real estate developer who treated our family gatherings like a charity project he was forced to sponsor. No one greeted me. Sylvia glared at Malik standing stoically behind my chair. She demanded to know why I brought hired muscle into her sanctuary. I calmly signaled Malik to place the briefcase on the floor. I told her I brought him to carry my bags since my husband was apparently too exhausted from his island vacation to lift a single finger. Marcus slammed his fist against his knee. He yelled that I had lost my mind. He demanded to know where his house was and where his money went. I ignored him entirely, focusing my gaze on the pristine white tablecloth. Sylvia took a deep breath, clasping her hands together in a posture of forced prayer. She spoke in her signature pulpit voice, dripping with condescension. She told me that postpartum hormones were clearly clouding my judgment. She insisted that men of Marcus' status experience immense pressure. She claimed he merely took a small break to clear his head so he could continue providing for me. A good Christian wife, she declared, supports her husband through his trials instead of throwing a childish tantrum. Jada chimed in seamlessly, resting her chin on her manicured hands. She told me I was acting completely out of line. She reminded me that Marcus had elevated my social status. She practically sneered as she recounted how I had dropped out of Howard University. She conveniently omitted the fact that I was forced to leave Howard because Sylvia drained my college fund to cover the legal fees for Marcus' first failed startup. According to Jada, Marcus rescued me from a life of obscurity. I took a slow sip of the sparkling water a maid had poured. I looked directly at my mother. I asked her if taking a 24-year-old junior analyst to an overwater villa in the Maldives was a standard stress relief tactic for men of faith. The room went dead silent. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting to his mother. Sylvia's jaw tightened. The facade cracked, revealing the ugly truth. She already knew. They all knew. They had actively covered for him, prioritizing his comfort over my dignity. Sylvia slammed her palm flat against the mahogany table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. She abandoned the soft, pious tone. Her voice turned vicious and sharp. She told me that successful men step out when they are suffocated at home. She screamed that I had no right to humiliate her son. She pointed a trembling finger at my face and called me a glorified babysitter. She yelled that I was nothing but a high school graduate playing business owner, and that Marcus gave me this luxury lifestyle. She demanded I return the house to him by tomorrow morning, or she would personally see to it that I was ruined in Atlanta. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I just sat there letting her echo the exact insults I had endured for my entire life. That was when Brent decided to intervene. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, wearing a smug, savior-complex smile. He adjusted his designer watch and looked at me like I was an uneducated child who had accidentally broken a toy. He spoke slowly, making sure to enunciate every syllable, clearly intending to put me in my place. "Listen to me, Zuri," Brent said, leaning his forearms on the table. "Real estate law is my territory. I do this for a living. You selling a marital property without Marcus' signature is not just a tantrum. It is a federal crime. You have committed wire fraud, title fraud, and grand larceny. You are looking at a decade in a federal penitentiary." He pulled his smartphone from his suit pocket and placed it firmly on the table. "I am calling the police right now," Brent declared, unlocking his screen. "We are going to have you arrested tonight unless you sign exactly what Jada drafts up for you and hand everything back to my brother-in-law." I did not flinch. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice shifting in Sylvia crystal glass. I reached for my sparkling water, lifted it to my lips, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the silence stretch, forcing Brent to hold his phone awkwardly in the air, his smug white savior complex hanging by a single thread. I set the glass down and gave him a smile so cold it could freeze the Georgia summer. "Call them, Brent," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "Go ahead and dial the police. But while you have the authorities on the line, you might want to ask them to check the status of your own commercial real estate license. You know, the one the state board quietly suspended last month for unethical fund diversion on that downtown high-rise project." Brent went completely pale. The color drained from his face so fast he looked translucent. His hand shook, and he slowly lowered his phone, placing it face down on the mahogany table. He refused to look at Jada, who was suddenly staring at him with her mouth slightly open. The brilliant corporate attorney had absolutely no idea her own husband was legally compromised and hiding a suspended license. In 5 seconds flat, I had completely neutralized the loudest man in the room. I turned my attention back to Marcus, who was sweating through his tailored suit. "Let us talk about federal crimes and marital property," I said smoothly. "You all seem to operate under the delusion that Marcus paid for my lifestyle. You think my business is just a hobby, a little passion project to keep me busy between changing diapers." I signaled to Malik. He opened the thick leather briefcase and handed me a pristine stack of bound financial documents. I tossed the first folder directly onto Sylvia expensive catered salmon. "That glorified babysitting business you love to mock generated $4.2 million in net revenue last year. I run an elite maternal wellness and postpartum concierge empire. My clients are the wives of professional athletes, television executives, and the very same politicians who sit in your front pews on Sunday mornings, Sylvia. They pay me tens of thousands of dollars for absolute discretion and luxury care. My company is an impenetrable fortress, and it funded every single aspect of the life you thought your son was providing." Marcus grabbed the folder, his eyes darting frantically across the profit and loss statements. He shook his head, muttering that this was impossible. He said his firm handled all the major wealth in the city, and he would have known if I was moving that kind of capital. "You did not know because I did not trust you," I replied flatly. I saw how you managed your client portfolios. I saw the unnecessary risks you took to look like a big shot at the country club. I bought that $1.5 million house through a blind LLC 3 years ago. The down payment, the mortgage, the property taxes, it all came from an offshore corporate account completely disconnected from your name. Legally speaking, Marcus, you never owned a single brick of that house. You were classified on paper as a non-paying tenant. Sylvia gasped, clutching the pearl necklace at her throat. She looked at her son as if she was seeing a stranger. The golden boy, the wealthy investment banker she had bragged about to thousands of parishioners, was effectively homeless and broke. He had been living in a house owned by his wife's secret empire, parading around like a king in a castle he did not even possess the deed to. Jada tried to recover the upper hand. She straightened her posture desperately, trying to channel her courtroom persona to cover for her husband's humiliation. She slammed her hand on the table, demanding I stop speaking in riddles. She declared that regardless of how the house was purchased, we were legally married in the state of Georgia. She claimed that any asset I acquired during the marriage, including my supposedly hidden business revenue, was joint property. Marcus' eyes lit up with desperate greed. Jada had just thrown him a lifeline. He jumped to his feet, knocking his heavy dining chair backward onto the hardwood floor. He pointed at me, his face twisted in a vicious sneer. "She is right," Marcus yelled, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We are married, Zuri. I do not care what kind of sneaky LLC you set up behind my back. You built that business while we were married, which means I own 50% of it. I am entitled to half of everything you have. I will take half the business, half the cash, and I will force the sale of whatever properties you are hiding. You are going to cut me a check for millions by the time my lawyers are done with you." I looked up at him. The man who had abandoned me during labor to take his 24-year-old mistress to the Maldives was now screaming that he was entitled to the fruits of my labor. He was demanding a massive payout for his betrayal. He felt so utterly justified in claiming what was mine. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the leather briefcase one more time. I pulled out a single, heavily notarized document with Marcus' own signature scrawled across the bottom page. I placed my hand flat on top of the paper and slid it slowly across the long mahogany table until it stopped right at the edge of his plate. "You would be entitled to half," I said quietly. "You would be entitled to half of everything I own if you had not signed this." Before Marcus could even reach out to touch the heavy parchment paper, the grand mahogany double doors of Sylvia Mansion swung open with a loud thud. The sharp, rapid clicking of stilettos echoed against the imported marble of the foyer. The heavy silence in the dining room shattered instantly. I did not turn my head, but I watched Marcus' face. The aggressive red flush of his anger instantly drained, replaced by a sickly, terrified gray. Into the formal dining room strolled Chloe. She was 24 years old, wearing a skin-tight bandage dress that was entirely inappropriate for a Buckhead family dinner and clutching a designer handbag that I instantly recognized as a cheap counterfeit. She looked around the opulent room with wide, hungry eyes before her gaze locked onto me. She stood there completely uninvited by me, yet radiating an unearned sense of absolute ownership. I expected Sylvia to summon her security to drag this intruder out of her pristine home. I expected Jada to launch into a legal tirade about trespassing. Instead, Sylvia stood up from the head of the table. She smoothed down her silk wrap, stepped past the catered salmon, and extended her arms with a warm, welcoming smile. "Come right on in, sweetheart," Sylvia cooed, kissing the air next to Chloe's cheek. "We have just been waiting for you." The air in my lungs turned to ice. It was not just Marcus. They all knew. I looked at Jada, who was suddenly very interested in her sparkling water, though a smug little smile played at the corner of her mouth. I looked at Brent, who crossed his arms and leaned back, clearly enjoying the theatrical humiliation they had arranged for me. My husband had not just been cheating on me while I carried his child. His mother and sister had been actively facilitating it. Sylvia had likely invited Chloe to Sunday dinners, smiled in her face, and blessed their unholy union while I was sitting at home rubbing my swollen belly and planning our family future. Sylvia turned to me, her eyes flashing with triumphant cruelty. She placed a manicured hand on Chloe's shoulder, presenting her like a prized trophy. "You see, Zuri?" Sylvia announced, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "A man like Marcus carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. He needs peace. He needs a woman who knows how to cater to him, a woman who understands her place and respects his authority. He does not need a wife who emasculates him by hiding money and running secret businesses behind his back. Chloe here understands how to treat a king." Marcus finally found his voice, though it sounded like a weak croak. "Mom," he stammered, pulling at his expensive silk tie. "What is she doing here right now? I told you I would handle Zuri today." Sylvia silenced him with a sharp glare. "You have handled nothing, Marcus. Your wife just walked into my home with a hired bodyguard and threatened your brother-in-law. It is time we put an end to this delusion. Zuri needs to see that she has already been replaced. She needs to understand that she holds absolutely no power in this family anymore." Chloe took that as her cue. She strutted past Sylvia and walked right up to Marcus' side. She placed a possessive hand on his shoulder, sliding her fingers down his tailored suit jacket. She looked at me from across the table, her lips curling into a wicked, triumphant smirk. She truly believed she had just won the ultimate prize. She thought she was stepping into a $1.5 million house and a life of endless luxury. "Marcus, promise me your spot, Zuri," Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "He told me months ago that you were too focused on your little agency to be a real wife. We are building a life together now. It is time for you to pack up your things, sign the divorce papers, and step aside. I am the woman he wants." To drive her point home, Chloe lifted her left hand and placed it squarely on Marcus' chest. The crystal chandelier above us caught the light of the massive, obnoxious rock sitting on her ring finger. It was huge, practically blinding, and designed to look like it cost at least $100,000. She flashed it at me, waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the tears, the screaming, the complete mental collapse of a postpartum woman who had just lost everything. I stared at the ring. Then I stared at Chloe's overly contoured face. Then I looked at Marcus, who was suddenly trembling, his eyes darting frantically between the prenuptial agreement lying on the table and the shiny ring on his mistress' finger. A strange sensation bubbled up inside my chest. I tried to suppress it, but it was impossible. I started to laugh. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a deep, rich, uncontrollable laugh that tore from my throat and echoed through the silent dining room. I threw my head back and laughed until my sides physically ached. Sylvia recoiled as if I had slapped her. Chloe's smirk completely vanished, replaced by nervous confusion. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, knowing exactly what was coming next. I wiped a single tear of pure amusement from my eye and leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I bypassed Sylvia and Chloe entirely and locked eyes with my sister-in-law. "Jada," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "You are a senior corporate attorney. Your attention to detail is supposed to be legendary. Your firm pays you $800 an hour to spot fraud. Did you really not notice?" Jada frowned, her legal instincts suddenly kicking in. "Notice what, Zuri?" I pointed a manicured finger directly at the massive rock on Chloe's left hand. I looked right at the 24-year-old girl who thought she had just conquered the world. "That ring on Chloe's finger," I said, making sure every single syllable landed with maximum impact. "That is the exact same cheap moissanite fake that your brother bought using your mother mega-church corporate credit card last week." Sylvia practically choked on her own breath. Her hand flew to her designer clutch, her manicured fingers fumbling blindly for her phone. The camera begins a slow, relentless circular track around the mahogany table, capturing the exact moment the collective delusion of the Washington family shattered. Sylvia tapped her screen, frantically loading the Greater Grace Cathedral corporate banking app. The blood drained from her face, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a pale mask as the recent transaction history loaded on her screen. $5,000 spent at a discount jeweler, masked poorly as a catering deposit for the upcoming youth ministry retreat. Chloe looked down at her hand, her eyes wide and panicked. The massive, flawless rock she had been flashing like a badge of honor just moments ago suddenly looked like exactly what it was, a cheap piece of glass purchased with stolen offering money. She looked at Marcus silently, begging him to deny it, begging him to tell her she was still stepping into a life of luxury. Marcus could not even look her in the eye. He stared at his empty china plate, the muscle in his jaw ticking furiously. Sylvia threw her phone onto the table. It slid and hit Brent water glass with a sharp clink. The circular camera movement continued, catching Brent leaning back in his chair, the smugness completely wiped from his face. He was an arrogant man, but he was not stupid. He knew exactly what corporate fraud looked like, and he knew how quickly the collateral damage could spread to his own suspended real estate business. Sylvia scrambled to reconstruct the narrative. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She pointed a trembling finger at me, bypassing the blatant theft of her church funds, bypassing the betrayal of my marriage, and going straight for the ultimate manipulation tactic. "It does not matter!" Sylvia shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her own hypocrisy. "So what if he used the card? He will pay it back. Marcus is a pillar of our church community. He is a respected black man in Atlanta. Do you have any idea how hard it is for him out there in the corporate world? And you, his own wife, come in here trying to destroy him over a minor indiscretion. You are tearing a black family apart, Zuri. You are airing our dirty laundry and making a mockery of everything we have built. You are supposed to protect your husband." I did not sit there and absorb her guilt trip. The camera tracks my movement smoothly as I pushed my chair back and stood up. I straightened my crimson blazer, looking down at the woman who had spent 5 years treating me like a stepping stone for her golden child. I towered over the table, radiating an absolute, unshakable calm. "I am not tearing a family apart, Sylvia," I said, my voice steady and resonant in the large dining room. "I am excising a parasite. You think I spent the last 18 days crying in a hospital bed while you all laughed behind my back? You think I just found out about his little island getaway and threw a tantrum? But you are operating on a flawed timeline. 18 days was just the execution phase. I have been tracking Marcus for 6 months." I signaled to Malik. He reached into the leather briefcase one final time. He did not pull out a single sheet of paper. He pulled out a massive, heavily bound stack of audit reports, bank statements, and wire transfer logs. I took the heavy stack from him and dropped it directly into the center of the table. The thud made Chloe jump in her seat. I looked at Jada, who was staring at the documents with the horrified recognition of a corporate lawyer, realizing her brother was entirely radioactive. "Your brother is not a wealthy investment banker, Jada," I explained, leaning my hands on the edge of the table and locking eyes with her. "He is a fraud. He has been broke for nearly a year. His lavish lifestyle, the custom suits, the country club memberships, the expensive dinners with Brent, those trips to the Maldives, all of it was funded by secretly siphoning money from his own clients. He has been funneling their returns into dummy accounts to maintain the illusion of black excellence you all care so much about." I turned my gaze back to Marcus. He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The tan he had acquired in the Maldives suddenly looked sickly and pale under the dining room chandelier. "Every single client portfolio he manages is bleeding." I continued, making sure the entire room heard the absolute finality in my words. "He has been floating cash from one account to the next, playing a dangerous game of financial roulette, while convincing himself he is the smartest man in the room. He did not just betray his marriage, he betrayed his fiduciary duty. He is a thief." Sylvia collapsed back into her chair, her hand covering her mouth. Chloe was inching her chair away from Marcus, her survival instincts finally kicking in as she realized the golden goose she had bet her future on was actually a ticking time bomb. The luxury life she thought she was stealing from me did not even exist. But Marcus' ego was a terminal disease. Even backed into a corner, completely exposed in front of his mother, his sister, and his mistress, he refused to surrender. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with venom and desperate arrogance. He let out a harsh, dismissive laugh, trying to project a power he no longer possessed. "You are out of your mind, Zuri," Marcus sneered, adjusting his suit jacket in a pathetic attempt to regain his composure. "You really think anyone is going to believe this garbage? My clients love me. I make them money. I golf with them. I know their families. They trust me. They are not going to look at some manufactured spreadsheet printed by a bitter postpartum ex-wife and take your word over mine. I will have my legal team bury you for defamation before the sun comes up tomorrow. I stood up perfectly straight. I did not blink. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was already glowing with a delivery confirmation receipt. I tapped the glass screen once. They do not have to believe me, Marcus, I said softly. I already forwarded the entire forensic audit to your firm compliance board 10 minutes ago. Sylvia practically choked on her own breath, a harsh, undignified sound that completely ruined her carefully cultivated aura of megachurch royalty. Her hand flew to her designer clutch, her manicured fingers fumbling blindly until she retrieved her smartphone. The room descended into a suffocating silence, broken only by the frantic tapping of Sylvia's long acrylic nails against the glass screen. I watched with quiet satisfaction as she opened the Greater Grace Cathedral corporate banking app, a financial account meant to serve the community, not fund her son's illicit affairs. The color drained from Sylvia's face, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a pale, crackling mask. The camera of her own reality had just zoomed in on the unvarnished truth. Right there at the top of the recent transaction history was a glaring charge for $5,000 at a wholesale discount jeweler. The transaction had been brazenly mislabeled in the ledger as a catering deposit for the upcoming youth ministry retreat. Her golden boy, the successful investment banker she paraded in front of thousands of parishioners every Sunday, was not just broke. He was stealing from the church, offering plates to buy fake diamonds for his mistress. Chloe looked down at her left hand, her eyes wide and suddenly terrified. The massive, flawless rock she had been flashing like a badge of honor just moments ago suddenly looked exactly like what it was, a cheap synthetic piece of glass. The illusion of her grand victory evaporated. She looked at Marcus silently, begging him to deny it, begging him to tell her she was still stepping into a life of luxury and endless wealth. Marcus could not even look her in the eye. He stared fixedly at his empty china plate, the muscle in his jaw ticking furiously. Sweat beaded on his forehead, rolling down his temples and staining the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. Sylvia threw her phone onto the table in disgust. It slid across the polished wood and hit Brent Waterglass with a sharp, ringing clink. Brent leaned back in his chair, the arrogant, smug expression completely wiped from his face. He was a ruthless man, but he was not stupid. He knew exactly what corporate fraud looked like, and he knew how quickly the collateral damage could spread to his own suspended real estate business. He shot a warning look at Jada. Jada was already calculating the fallout. The brilliant corporate attorney was staring at her brother with horrified recognition. Her pristine legal reputation was suddenly tied to a man who was entirely radioactive. She physically inched her chair away from Marcus, treating him like a contagious disease. But Sylvia was a master of manipulation, a woman who had spent decades twisting the narrative from the pulpit to serve her own ends. When confronted with irrefutable proof of her son's failures, she did not apologize. She did not express shame. She pivoted to aggression. She pushed her chair back, the heavy legs scraping violently against the hardwood floor. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, bypassing the blatant theft of her church funds and the devastating betrayal of my marriage. She went straight for the ultimate guilt trip, utilizing the very community she had just allowed her son to rob. "It does not matter!" Sylvia shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her own hypocrisy. "So what if he used the card? I authorize church expenses all the time, and he will pay it back. Marcus is a pillar of our church community. He is a respected black man in Atlanta. Do you have any idea how hard it is for him out there in the corporate world? And you, his own wife, come in here trying to destroy him over a minor indiscretion. You are tearing a black family apart, Zuri. You are airing our dirty laundry and making a mockery of everything we have built. You are supposed to protect your husband, not humiliate him." I did not sit there and absorb her toxic tirade. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table and pushed myself up, rising to my full height. I straightened my crimson blazer, looking down at the woman who had spent 5 years treating me like an uneducated stepping stone for her golden child. I dominated the space, radiating an absolute, unshakable calm that made Sylvia step back. "I am not tearing a family apart, Sylvia," I said, my voice steady and resonant, carrying the authority of a woman who had meticulously reclaimed her power. "I am excising a parasite. You all think I spent the last 18 days crying in a hospital bed while you laughed behind my back. You think I just found out about his little island getaway and threw a postpartum tantrum. But you are operating on a completely flawed timeline. 18 days was just the execution phase of my plan. I have been tracking Marcus' financial movements for 6 months. I signaled to Malik, who had remained a silent, intimidating presence behind my chair. He reached into the leather briefcase one final time. He did not pull out a single sheet of paper. He pulled out a massive, heavily bound stack of forensic audit reports, bank statements, and wire transfer logs. I took the heavy binder from him and dropped it directly into the center of the table. The heavy thud made the crystal wine glasses rattle and caused Chloe to jump out of her seat. I looked directly at Jada, ensuring the corporate lawyer understood the exact gravity of the situation. "Your brother is not a wealthy investment banker, Jada." I explained, my words falling like hammer blows. "He is a fraud. He has been functionally broke for nearly a year. His lavish lifestyle, the custom suits, the country club memberships, the expensive dinners with Brent, those exotic trips to the Maldives, all of it was funded by secretly siphoning money from his own clients. He has been funneling their returns into dummy accounts to maintain the illusion of excellence you all care so much about." I turned my relentless gaze back to Marcus. He was gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles were white. The tan he had acquired in the Maldives suddenly looked sickly and pale under the bright dining room chandelier. "Every single client portfolio he manages is bleeding." I continued, making sure the entire room heard the absolute finality in my voice. "He has been floating cash from one account to the next, playing a dangerous game of financial roulette while convincing himself he is the smartest man in the room. He did not just betray his marriage vows, he betrayed his fiduciary duty. He is a thief, and the paper trail is undeniable." Sylvia collapsed back into her chair, her hand covering her mouth as the reality of her son's impending ruin finally set in. Chloe, operating on pure survival instinct, backed away from Marcus. The 24-year-old mistress realized the golden goose she had bet her future on was actually a ticking time bomb. The luxury life she thought she was stealing from me did not even exist. But Marcus' ego was a terminal disease. Even backed into a corner, completely exposed in front of his mother, his sister, and his mistress, he refused to surrender. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with venom and a desperate, clinging arrogance. He let out a harsh, dismissive laugh, trying to project a power he had permanently lost. "You are out of your mind, Zuri," Marcus sneered, adjusting his suit jacket in a pathetic attempt to regain his composure. "You really think anyone is going to believe this garbage? My clients love me. I make them money. I golf with them. I know their families. They trust me. They are not going to look at some manufactured spreadsheet printed by a bitter postpartum ex-wife and take your word over mine. I will have my legal team bury you for defamation before the sun comes up tomorrow." I stood perfectly straight, completely unfazed by his empty threats. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was already glowing brightly with a delivery confirmation receipt from a secure email server. I tapped the glass screen once, locking my eyes with his. "They do not have to believe me, Marcus," I said softly. "I already forwarded the entire forensic audit to your firm compliance board 10 minutes ago." Jada lunged forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor of the bank lobby. Her face was contorted with absolute unhinged rage. The polished, composed corporate attorney had completely vanished, replaced by a desperate woman trying to salvage her family-crumbling empire. She pointed a manicured finger inches from my face, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and drawing the attention of every teller and security guard in the building. She screamed that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. She threatened to sue me for financial abuse, marital theft, and malicious diversion of funds. She swore she would drag me through the Fulton County family court system until I was completely penniless. According to Jada, I had illegally locked her brother out of his marital assets, and she was going to personally draft the lawsuit that would throw me in a federal penitentiary. She promised to strip my maternal wellness agency from me piece by piece and hand the entire corporation over to Marcus as restitution for my supposed financial crimes. I let her finish. I stood perfectly still, flanked by my forensic accountant and the bank manager, who was now sweating profusely and backing away from the explosive scene. I let Jada expend all her energy, watching her chest heave as she gasped for air. She thought her law degree and her loud voice could bully me into submission. She thought I was still the intimidated quiet girl who dropped out of Howard University. When she finally stopped yelling, the silence in the bank was deafening. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the exact same heavily notarized document I had slid across Sylvia Mahogany dining table the night before. The document Marcus had been too panicked to actually read when he was demanding 50% of my business. I held it out. Jada snatched it from my hand, her eyes scanning the bold text at the top of the first page. "Let us talk about marital theft and business equity." "Jada," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, dangerous authority that commanded the entire lobby. "You want to take me to court to claim half of my assets. You want to argue that Marcus is entitled to my company because we are legally married under state law. But you are conveniently forgetting the legal cornerstone of your brother's fragile ego." I watched Marcus swallow hard, his eyes darting frantically to the document in Jada's hands. The memory was clearly hitting him, the arrogance draining from his face as the realization set in. 5 years ago, I continued pacing slowly around them, keeping my posture dominant and relaxed. 5 years ago, Marcus was the rising star of his investment firm. He was marrying a woman who had dropped out of college. He was so incredibly eager to prove to Sylvia, to you, and to the entire Buckhead Country Club set, that he was the wealthy breadwinner protecting his vast fortune from a gold digger. Do you remember that, Marcus? You were so arrogant. You insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect your future millions from the girl who had nothing. You printed a standard boilerplate contract, bragged about your financial boundaries to all your frat brothers, and demanded I sign it before the wedding. Marcus shifted on his feet, looking around the bank lobby as if searching for an emergency exit. The bank security guards were watching closely, arms crossed, ensuring he did not make a sudden move. "But you were also exceptionally cheap," I said, dropping my voice to a razor-sharp whisper. "You were cheap, and you were arrogant. You did not want to pay a premium family law attorney to review the final draft. You assumed I was just a naive 24-year-old who would blindly sign whatever you put in front of me. You never even bothered to read the fine print after my legal team sent back the revised version. You just signed on the dotted line, thrilled to play the role of the untouchable corporate king who had put his wife in her proper place." Jada was flipping through the pages now, her eyes darting back and forth across the dense legal paragraphs. Her breathing hitched. Her hands began to shake slightly. She was a corporate lawyer, and the sheer magnitude of the trap her brother had walked into was becoming terrifyingly clear. "My lawyer was not cheap, Jada," I stated, making sure she heard every single word. "My lawyer was an absolute shark. I had her embed a lethal, highly specific morality clause deep in Section 4 of the Asset Division Framework." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at his sister silently, begging her to tell him this was a bluff, praying that his legal genius of a sister would find a way out of the snare. "The clause is explicitly clear," I explained, turning my attention fully to Marcus, ensuring he understood the exact mechanism of his own destruction. "It states that in the event of proven infidelity during the marriage, the offending party automatically forfeits any and all claims to spousal support, business equity, and shared marital assets." But we went a step further, Marcus. My lawyer included a specialized escalation clause. If the infidelity occurs while the faithful spouse is pregnant, the financial penalties are absolute and irrevocable. You do not just lose access to my maternal wellness company. You surrender every single joint asset we share, including your own personal investments that were commingled during the marriage. Jada let out a strangled gasp. She was staring at the final page, staring at the unmistakable, legally binding signature of her own brother. the signature he had proudly dashed off 5 years ago without a second thought, effectively signing away his entire life. You abandoned me in a delivery room to fly to the Maldives with a 24-year-old junior analyst, I said, my voice echoing with icy finality. You documented your own betrayal on hotel receipts funded by stolen church money. The infidelity is a matter of public and legal record. The escalation clause is officially triggered. The prenuptial agreement you demanded to protect your imaginary wealth is the exact document that just stripped you of everything you have ever touched. Jada's arms went completely limp. The heavy packet of legal papers slipped from her trembling fingers and hit the marble floor with a loud, echoing slap. She looked at her brother as if he was a ghost walking among the living. All her corporate bravado, all her vicious courtroom threats, completely evaporated into thin air. She was a lawyer, and she knew a bulletproof contract when she saw one. There was no judge in the state of Georgia who would overturn it. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing Jada by the shoulders and shaking her violently. He screamed at her to do her job. He yelled that she was a senior partner, that she needed to find a loophole, that she needed to sue me for everything I had and freeze my accounts immediately. He demanded she fix this mess and rip the contract to shreds before he was left on the street. Jada slowly raised her head. She looked at the man who had just ruined his own life through pure, unadulterated arrogance. Her voice was barely a whisper when she delivered the final blow. There is no loophole. Marcus, she literally owns everything down to the watch on your wrist. Marcus stared down at his left wrist. He looked at the heavy gold Rolex ticking against his skin as if it had suddenly turned into a pair of handcuffs. The absolute reality of his situation crashed down on him right there on the polished marble floor of the bank. He was entirely stripped of his power, his assets, and his dignity. Jada physically took a step back from him. Her sharp legal mind was already calculating the catastrophic collateral damage of being associated with her brother. If Marcus went down for defrauding his clients, her own law firm would undoubtedly launch an internal investigation into her accounts, just by association. The bank manager, completely overwhelmed by the explosive corporate drama unfolding in his lobby, nervously gestured for his security guards to escort everyone toward the exit. I did not need an escort. I smoothly buttoned my crimson blazer, nodded to my forensic accountant, and signaled for Malik to clear a path to the heavy glass revolving doors. I was finished here. The trap had been sprung, and the Washington family was bleeding out on the floor of their favorite financial institution. But as Malik pushed open the heavy door to the street, a hand shot out and grabbed the metal frame blocking my exit. It was Brent. He had slipped away from the hysterics of his wife and brother-in-law, trailing behind me with the desperate, calculated speed of a cornered animal. The smug, condescending sneer he had worn at Sylvia's dining table was gone. His face was flushed and beads of sweat were forming at his hairline. Yet despite his obvious panic over his suspended real estate license, he still tried to stand tall. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the unearned authority of a reasonable white savior stepping in to calm down an irrational black woman. Zuri, let us just take a breath and lower the temperature, Brent said, his voice dropping into a smooth, pacifying tone. He looked around the lobby, acting as if he and I were the only two sane people in the room. You have made your point. You played a brilliant hand. Marcus is an absolute idiot, and he deserves exactly what he is getting. But you are running too hot right now. You are acting purely on emotion, and in the corporate world, being this aggressive only paints a target on your back. You need to play nice, or this family is going to drag you through years of miserable litigation. I stopped walking. I instructed Malik to step back just an inch, giving Brent enough rope to hang himself. I am not acting on emotion, Brent, I replied, my voice dangerously flat. I am acting on mathematics. Brent forced a patronizing smile, leaning closer, invading my personal space, as if we were old friends conspiring in a boardroom. Listen to me, he whispered. Sylvia is vindictive, and Jada knows every dirty legal trick in the book. They will tie up your business in discovery for a decade, but I can control them. I have leverage over my wife, and Sylvia listens to me because I manage her real estate portfolio. I can make sure Marcus walks away quietly. I can make sure your divorce is entirely seamless and your business stays perfectly intact. I will handle the Washington family for you. I tilted my head, studying the sheer audacity radiating from his pores. And what exactly does this seamless divorce cost me? Brent swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward my forensic accountant, then back to me. He was broke, his license was gone, and he was staring at the woman who had just revealed she controlled a multi-million-dollar empire. I need a bridge loan, Brent said, trying to make the request sound casual and routine. $500,000. Transferred to my secondary LLC by the end of business today. My downtown development project is stalling because of a minor bureaucratic misunderstanding with the state board. You float me the cash to keep my contractors working, and I guarantee you never hear from Marcus or Sylvia again. Consider it an investment in your own peace of mind. He actually believed his own pitch. He truly thought he could gaslight me into believing I was a hysterical, aggressive woman who needed a calm, rational man to save her from her own success. He thought he could extort $500,000 from me to fund his failing construction company while masquerading as my protector. My eyes turned ice cold. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out my smartphone. You have always underestimated me, Brent, I said, unlocking my screen. You sat at my dining table for 5 years, drinking my wine, eating my food, and looking right through me. You assumed that because I was quiet, I was oblivious. You assumed my forensic accountant only looked at Marcus' personal checking accounts. Brent's forced smile began to slip, his eyes locked onto my phone screen. When I decided to track my husband's stolen money, I did not just look at where it came from. I explained, raising the volume on my phone to the maximum level. I looked at exactly where it went. I looked at how a junior investment banker and a disgraced real estate developer managed to hide millions of dollars right under the nose of the IRS. I pressed play. The pristine audio quality of the recording echoed clearly in the quiet corner of the bank lobby. It was a phone call from 3 months ago. Marcus' voice played first, sounding arrogant and relaxed. My Mother Youth Center initiative just received a $2.5 million community grant from the state. Sylvia does not know how to manage that kind of liquid capital. I am routing $1 million of it through your shell company for consulting fees and structural materials, Brent. Then came Brent's voice, perfectly captured, completely undeniable. Just make sure the invoices you generate match my fake vendor identification numbers. Marcus, we clean the cash through the construction payroll, split the overhead 60-40, and nobody in Sylvia congregation or the state grant office ever knows a thing. Send the wire transfer on Monday. I paused the recording. Brent took a staggering step backward. All the blood rushed out of his face, leaving his skin a sickly, mottled gray. His mouth opened and closed, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The smug, reasonable white savior was gone, replaced by a desperate criminal staring directly at a federal indictment. You really thought I was just auditing my husband Brent? I asked, slipping the phone back into my bag and stepping out into the bright Atlanta sunlight. You are going down with him. The bright Atlanta sunlight felt warm against my skin as the heavy bank doors closed behind me. Brent was left suffocating in the lobby, trapped in the wreckage of his own greed and impending federal charges. The Washington family was mathematically cornered, legally paralyzed, and financially destitute, but they were a multi-headed hydra. If you cut off their financial supply, they would inevitably attack with the only weapon they had left in their arsenal, their social capital. Within 48 hours, the whispers began. Sylvia and Marcus, realizing they could not win in a courtroom or a boardroom, pivoted to social warfare. They mobilized their entire network with the speed and precision of a military campaign. They weaponized the massive congregation of Greater Grace Cathedral. They worked the phones across the elite black circles of Atlanta, calling country club presidents, charity board directors, and influential politicians. They reached out to their respective HBCU alumni associations, leveraging decades of Spelman and Morehouse connections. The narrative they spun was a masterclass in patriarchal gaslighting and misogynoir. Marcus played the role of the devastated, faithful husband to absolute perfection. Sylvia played the heartbroken, prayerful matriarch standing by her son through an unimaginable family crisis. The story they sold was that I was suffering from a severe, dangerous postpartum psychotic break. They told everyone who would listen that my hormones had driven me completely insane, that I had kidnapped Marcus' newborn child in a fit of paranoid delusion, and that I had illegally frozen his hard-earned assets out of pure malice. They painted me as a bitter, unstable woman, actively trying to destroy a prominent, successful black man who was just trying to keep his family together. The social warfare was swift and it was brutal. My maternal wellness agency catered exclusively to high-net-worth clients, women who valued discretion, stability, and pristine reputations above all else. The vicious rumors acted like a toxin in the water supply. First, the prominent society wives canceled their premium consultancy packages, leaving apologetic but vague voicemails. Then two major corporate wellness contracts deals I had spent a year negotiating were suddenly placed on indefinite hold. My inbox filled with polite but firm emails citing a sudden change in direction. The Washingtons were systematically starving my business. They were trying to force me to surrender by cutting off my independent income and isolating me from the community I had served for years. The camera tracks my movement slowly as I sat alone in the nursery later that evening. The room was bathed in the soft, warm glow of a star-shaped nightlight. I held my sleeping infant against my chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of tiny breaths. The heavy oak door was shut, blocking out the chaos of the world. My phone vibrated endlessly on the nursing chair beside me. The screen lit up over and over again with yet another cancellation notification, another text from a former friend asking if I needed psychiatric help, another Google alert featuring my name tied to Marcus' fabricated sob story. The pressure was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, attempting to crush the resolve right out of me. This was their strategy. They wanted me to break under the isolation. They expected me to call Sylvia crying, begging for a truce, offering to drop the prenuptial enforcement and hand over my company in exchange for my reputation and my social standing. I stroked my baby's soft hair, feeling the delicate pulse of life under my fingertips. I did not shed a single tear. My posture remained rigid, my breathing calm, my spirit entirely unbroken. "Let them talk," I whispered into the quiet room, making a promise to my child. "Let them burn their own house down." The final act of their desperate smear campaign came from the weakest, most foolish link in their chain. Chloe. She had clearly been coached by Marcus and Jada to secure public sympathy and push the narrative of my supposed insanity to a younger demographic. My phone screen illuminated with an alert from a burner account I used for market research. Chloe was broadcasting live on Instagram. I tapped the notification, watching the viewer count surge rapidly from 500 to over 3,000 in mere minutes. People loved a scandal, and the Washington family drama had become the hottest topic in the city. Chloe was sitting in what looked like the living room of her luxury apartment. She was wearing a modest, oversized knit sweater. Her face was scrubbed completely clean of makeup to make her look exceptionally young, innocent, and vulnerable. She was sobbing uncontrollably, wiping away tears with trembling fingers, staring directly into the camera lens to deliver a performance worthy of daytime television. She claimed she had been terrorized. She told her thousands of viewers that Marcus was nothing more than a professional mentor who had been kindly helping her navigate the harsh corporate world. She swore that his crazy, jealous wife had completely fabricated a malicious affair out of thin air. She sobbed harder, clutching a tissue to her chest, claiming that I had cornered her, that I had explicitly threatened her life, and that she was currently living in constant fear of what a mentally unstable, violent woman might do to her next. She begged her followers to send prayers for Marcus, who she claimed was fighting a brave legal battle against a monster just to get his kidnapped child back. I watched her crocodile tears with a detached, clinical fascination. She was a 24-year-old girl playing a very dangerous adult game. She thought the digital screen protected her. She thought Marcus was actually shielding her from the financial fallout. The viewer count hit 5,000. The live chat was moving at lightning speed, a blur of text filled with angry comments directed at me, calling me unhinged, demanding I be locked in a psychiatric ward, praising Chloe for her bravery in speaking out. I set my baby down gently in the crib, pulling the soft blanket up and making sure not to wake the sleeping infant. I walked over to the window, looking out at the darkened street below. I picked up my phone and opened the keyboard. I did not need to issue a formal statement. I did not need to hire a public relations firm to defend my mental health to an audience of gullible strangers. I only needed one sentence to shatter the foundation of her entire existence. I typed my message into the live chat, my official user handle highlighted in bright text for all 5,000 viewers to see. I pressed send, watching my words freeze the frantic scrolling of the comment section instantly. Chloe, did Marcus tell you he took out a second mortgage on your mother house? The morning sun had barely crested the Atlanta skyline when the heavy brass-framed glass doors of the city's most exclusive financial institution were violently shoved open. A fast-paced, dynamic tracking shot captures the frantic, aggressive energy of the moment. Marcus and Jada stormed into the pristine, marble-lined lobby of the bank, moving in tandem like a pair of corporate predators closing in for the kill. Marcus had spent the entire night scrambling, his ego bruised, but his survival instincts running on overdrive. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, masking his underlying panic with a thick veneer of arrogant smugness. In his mind, he was executing a flawless counterattack. He believed he was about to financially decapitate me, cutting me off from my business revenue and starving me into submission before the ink on my forensic audit could even dry. Jada matched his aggressive stride, her expensive stilettos clicking sharply against the polished stone floor. She was in full legal warfare mode, clutching a leather briefcase packed with emergency injunctions and cease and desist orders. They bypassed the standard teller lines, ignoring the velvet ropes and the hushed, refined atmosphere of the private wealth management sector. They marched directly toward the elevated mahogany desk of the senior branch manager. Marcus leaned against the edge of the desk, shooting the manager a condescending, entitled smirk. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, projecting the absolute confidence of a man who believed he owned the building and everyone working inside it. Jada did not even wait for the manager to offer a proper greeting. She slammed her heavy briefcase onto the polished wood and flashed her senior corporate lawyer badge directly in the man's face. Her voice was sharp, loud, and meticulously engineered to intimidate. She immediately launched into a rapid-fire barrage of heavy legal jargon, demanding an absolute and instantaneous freeze on all financial accounts, business credit lines, and routing numbers associated with Zuri, Washington, and the Maternal Wellness Agency. She claimed there was pending marital litigation involving severe asset dissipation, threatening the bank manager with personal liability, federal reporting, and a massive corporate lawsuit if he did not lock down my funds that exact second. The branch manager, a meticulously groomed man with silver hair, blinked in shock at the sudden verbal assault. He adjusted his glasses, his professional composure slipping as Jada continued to bark state financial statutes at him. Intimidated by the very real threat of corporate litigation from a known powerhouse attorney, he quickly turned to his dual-monitor terminal and began typing frantically, his fingers flying across the keyboard to pull up the Washington family financial portfolio. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, his smug smile widening. He shot a triumphant look at Jada. He genuinely thought he had outsmarted me. He thought my 18 days of meticulous planning could be undone by a 5-minute temper tantrum and a loud lawyer. He expected the manager to confirm the freeze, leaving me stranded with no access to the capital I had built entirely from the ground up. Instead, the heavy rhythmic tapping of the keyboard abruptly stopped. The bank manager stared at his glowing screen. The color rapidly drained from his face. He leaned closer to the monitor, his brow furrowing in deep, unparalleled confusion. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, rolling down the side of his face and soaking into his collar. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously between the flashing red alerts on his screen and the aggressive man standing on the other side of his desk. "Well?" Marcus snapped, his patience wearing thin as he tapped his fingers impatiently against the mahogany wood. I do not have all morning. Confirm the freeze on my wife business accounts and transfer the primary control authorizations directly to my name so we can be done with this. The manager pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his forehead. His voice trembled slightly as he finally spoke. Sir, I cannot execute a freeze on the maternal wellness agency accounts, the manager stammered, shrinking back into his leather chair. Those accounts underwent a total restructuring protocol yesterday afternoon. Your name and access authorizations have been completely severed from the business profiles. You have absolutely no legal authority to freeze those assets. Marcus' posture stiffened. The smug arrogance instantly evaporated, replaced by a sudden rising panic. He slammed his hands flat on the desk, leaning menacingly over the manager. That is impossible, Marcus growled, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding register. I am a joint holder. I transferred capital through those routing numbers just last week. Look at my personal accounts. Look at the primary investment portfolios. Pull them up right now and stop wasting my time. The manager flinched, his fingers trembling as he navigated to a new tab on his banking software. He stared at the screen for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the lobby seemed to amplify as the devastating reality of the situation materialized in cold, hard digital numbers. Sir, the manager whispered, his eyes wide with absolute dread. I cannot access any investment portfolios. They have been entirely seized under an external compliance protocol. And your personal checking and savings accounts are not just empty, they are in a severe negative deficit. Your personal accounts are currently overdrawn by exactly $100,000. Jada physically recoiled, stepping away from the desk as if it had suddenly caught fire. She looked at her brother in sheer horror. The aggressive legal threats died completely in her throat. She realized instantly that the bank was not looking at a wealthy elite client. They were looking at a catastrophic financial liability. Marcus' face twisted in a mask of furious denial. $100,000 overdrawn, he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, no longer caring who heard him. That is a glitch in your broken system. I have liquid capital floating in offshore routing accounts. Find it. Find my money right now before I have your job. The heavy solid oak door of the bank manager inner private suite clicked open with a sharp echoing snap. The tracking shot pivots smoothly, capturing my entrance. I stepped out of the private office, my heels gliding silently over the carpet. I was dressed in a tailored ivory suit, radiating an aura of total unbothered control. Beside me walked the city top-tier forensic accountant, a severe-looking professional holding a glowing digital tablet packed with undeniable proof of his financial crimes. I stopped a few feet away from my husband, watching him unravel in real time. The desperation in his eyes was palpable. He had walked into the bank believing he was an untouchable king, and he was currently standing there completely destitute. I looked at him, my expression perfectly serene, and delivered the absolute finality of his ruin. Looking for your offshore accounts. Marcus, I asked, my voice cutting through the silence of the lobby like a blade of ice. I triggered the fraud alert this morning. The heavy glass doors of the bank closed behind me, sealing Brent inside with the suffocating reality of his own destruction. I did not look back. Malik matched my stride as we walked toward the waiting black SUV, the bright Atlanta sunlight offering a stark contrast to the dark financial grave I had just buried my husband and his brother-in-law inside. They were legally cornered, mathematically ruined, and stripped of their leverage. But the Washingtons were an institution in this city, and an institution does not collapse without a brutal scorched earth fight. Realizing they were completely outmatched in a courtroom and a boardroom, Sylvia and Marcus immediately pivoted to the only battlefield where they still held ammunition. They launched a vicious, highly coordinated campaign of social warfare. The attack was swift and ruthless. Sylvia weaponized her position as the highly respected First Lady of Greater Grace Cathedral, standing before her massive congregation on Sunday morning, with a perfectly rehearsed solitary tear sliding down her cheek. She asked for prayers for her son, painting a tragic, compelling picture of a devoted father fighting to save his family from unexpected destruction. Marcus, meanwhile, worked the phones with the precision of a seasoned political operative. He tapped into his extensive network of Morehouse Brothers fraternity alumni and the upper echelon of the Atlanta Black elite. He sat in dimly lit cigar lounges and private country club dining rooms, sipping expensive bourbon, while spinning a masterful narrative of patriarchal victimhood. The story they sold the city was devastatingly calculated, relying on the oldest, most damaging stereotypes available. They did not just call me angry or vindictive, they weaponized my recent pregnancy. They painted me as a mentally unstable, hysterical postpartum woman who had suffered a severe, dangerous psychological break. Marcus told his influential fraternity brothers and corporate clients that I had completely lost my grip on reality, that I had kidnapped his newborn child in a fit of paranoid delusion, and that I had illegally hijacked his hard-earned business assets to fund my psychotic episode. Sylvia reinforced the lie, systematically calling my former mentors sorority sisters and society peers to express her deep, prayerful concern for my deteriorating mental health. Their strategy was designed to completely isolate me, to strip away my credibility, so that when the financial fraud charges inevitably dropped, the city would view me as a crazy, vindictive wife trying to frame an innocent, successful black man. The collateral damage hit my business almost immediately. My maternal wellness agency catered exclusively to high-net-worth families, politicians, executives, and celebrities who valued absolute discretion and pristine reputations above all else. The rumors acted like a fast-spreading poison in the water supply. Within 48 hours, the cancellations began rolling in. 3 prominent society wives terminated their premium consultancy packages, having their assistants leave vague, apologetic voicemails. A lucrative corporate wellness partnership I had spent 9 months negotiating was suddenly placed on an indefinite hold, pending an internal review. My inbox filled with polite but icy emails from former allies, citing a sudden shift in their scheduling needs. The Washingtons were systematically starving my business, attempting to force my surrender by cutting off my independent revenue and exiling me from the community I had served flawlessly for a decade. The pressure was a physical weight, a suffocating, invisible force designed to crush me into submission. That evening, the camera would have found me completely alone in my baby nursery. The room was dark, illuminated only by the soft, warm glow of a star-shaped nightlight, casting gentle shadows against the walls. I sat in the plush rocking chair, holding my sleeping infant against my chest. The house was dead quiet save for the rhythmic, steady breathing of my child. My smartphone sat on the small wooden table beside me, its screen lighting up in the dark every few minutes with another piece of bad news. A text from a former friend asking if I needed a psychiatric referral. An alert from a local gossip blog running a blind item about a prominent Atlanta wellness CEO going off the deep end. A cancellation notice from my oldest and most loyal client. They wanted me to break. They expected me to fall to my knees, to call Sylvia crying, begging for my reputation back, in exchange for dropping the prenuptial enforcement and letting Marcus walk away with my money and his pride intact. I looked down at the innocent face of my sleeping baby. I did not shed a single tear. My posture remained rigid, my breathing calm, my spirit entirely unbreakable. I gently stroked my child's soft cheek, making a silent promise in the dark room. They had vastly underestimated the endurance of a woman who had built her own empire from scratch. I would not negotiate with terrorists, and I would certainly not surrender to them. The final desperate act of their smear campaign came from the weakest link in their chain. Chloe. Marcus and Jada had clearly coached the mistress, realizing that public sympathy required a younger, more vulnerable victim to solidify my image as a deranged monster. My phone vibrated with a priority alert from a burner account I used for market research. Chloe had just gone live on Instagram. I unlocked my screen and tapped the notification, watching with detached fascination as her viewer count surged rapidly. The Washington family drama had become an open secret in Atlanta, and people were hungry for the scandal. Within minutes, her audience spiked from a few hundred to over 3,000 viewers. Chloe was broadcasting from the living room of her luxury apartment, the very apartment Marcus was illegally funding with stolen money. She wore an oversized, slouchy sweater, her face scrubbed completely free of makeup to enhance her youth and perceived innocence. She was sobbing uncontrollably, wiping away heavy tears with trembling fingers, playing her role with daytime television theatricality. She stared directly into the camera lens, her voice shaking as she fed the thousands of viewers the exact script Marcus had written for her. She claimed that Marcus was nothing more than a professional mentor, a kind, generous man helping her navigate her career. She swore that his wife had fabricated a malicious delusional affair out of pure paranoia. She sobbed harder, clutching her chest, telling the digital audience that I had cornered her, that I had explicitly threatened her physical safety, and that she was currently living in absolute terror of what a violent, mentally unstable woman might do to her next. She begged her followers to pray for Marcus, painting him as a brave father fighting a monster to get his child back safely. The viewer count crossed 5,000. The live chat was a rapid-fire blur of text full of outrage directed entirely at me. Strangers were calling me unhinged, demanding I be locked away in a psychiatric ward, praising Chloe for her bravery in speaking out against a wealthy, abusive woman. She thought the screen protected her. She thought Marcus was actually shielding her from the financial fallout. I set my baby gently into the crib, pulling the soft blanket up and making sure not to disturb the peaceful sleep. I walked over to the window, staring out into the quiet Atlanta night. I picked up my phone and opened the keyboard. I did not need a public relations firm. I did not need to defend my sanity to an audience of gullible strangers. I only needed to drop a single match on the gasoline she was standing in. I typed my message into the live chat using my verified official user handle for all 5,000 viewers to see. I pressed send, and my words pinned themselves to the bottom of the screen, instantly freezing the frantic scrolling of the comment section. Chloe did. Marcus tell you he took out a second mortgage on your mother house. The moment my comment appeared on the screen, the entire dynamic of the broadcast fractured. For 3 agonizing seconds, Chloe simply stared at the bright white text pinned to the bottom of her feed. The exaggerated, theatrical sobs hitched in her throat, the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. She leaned closer to her smartphone, her eyes darting frantically as she processed the mathematical reality of what I had just exposed. Her mother house, the sudden loans, the towering stacks of legal paperwork Marcus had convinced her to sign, under the guise of starting a joint investment portfolio for their future child. The chat exploded. 5,000 viewers instantly pivoted from attacking me to interrogating her. The digital mob turned on a dime. Chloe's hands began to shake violently. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some kind of rehearsed denial, to spin the web of lies Marcus had meticulously crafted for her, but her vocal cords failed her completely. She scrambled for her phone, knocking over a glass on her coffee table in her blind panic. The screen blurred wildly. The audio caught a sharp, desperate gasp, and then the broadcast abruptly cut to black. I locked my phone screen, the quiet calm of my nursery settling back over me. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for the roots to tear their foundation apart. Less than 24 hours later, the poison I injected into their alliance took full, devastating effect. The camera sweeps dynamically across the opulent, crystal-lit dining room of Atlanta's most exclusive steakhouse. The lunchtime crowd was a sea of bespoke suits, designer dresses, and quiet, high-stakes corporate negotiations. The ambient hum of clinking silver and jazz music provided a perfect, refined backdrop for a public execution. Waiters glided silently between tables, pouring sparkling water and serving expensive cuts of meat to the city elite. Marcus sat in a secluded leather booth near the back. He looked ragged. The impeccable grooming that usually defined his charismatic presence was slipping. His tie was loosened, his posture was rigid, and he was nursing a top-shelf scotch he could absolutely no longer afford. He was desperately trying to maintain the illusion of control, waiting for Chloe to arrive so he could spin a new web of lies, gaslight her into submission, and keep her compliant. He needed her to be the tragic victim. He needed her to anchor his defense. He did not get the chance. Chloe did not walk into the restaurant. She stormed the building. She bypassed the maitre d', ignoring his protests, as her heels struck the hardwood floor with violent, unyielding purpose. She was no longer the soft, vulnerable victim from the Instagram livestream. She was a woman who had just spent the entire night wide awake, running credit checks, pulling property records, and analyzing bank statements. She was a woman who had realized she was standing on a financial landmine detonator, and Marcus held the trigger. She reached his booth and slammed a thick manila folder directly onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sound cracked like a gunshot, drawing the eyes of nearby diners and silencing the immediate vicinity. Marcus flinched, his eyes darting nervously around the room to see who was watching. He reached out, attempting to use his trademark pacifying tone. "Chloe, baby, keep your voice down. We are in public. Sit down and let me explain everything to you. You are overreacting." "Explain what?" Chloe shouted, completely ignoring the stares of the Atlanta elite. "Explain how you forged my signature to open 5 different platinum credit cards. Explain how you maxed every single one of them out to pay for your mother legal fees." Marcus' face went pale. The blood rushed from his cheeks. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the folder to pull it out of sight, but Chloe snatched it back. She was trembling with a potent mixture of rage and absolute terror. "You told me you were building our future," she cried, her voice echoing off the high gilded ceilings. "I trusted you. I gave you my social security number because you said your assets were temporarily tied up by your vindictive wife. But you are not temporarily tied up. You are completely broke. You have absolutely nothing. And you leveraged my mother home to cover the deficit in your fraudulent business accounts. You used my identity to launder your stolen money." The surrounding tables fell completely silent. The wealthy patrons, many of whom recognized Marcus from his country club memberships and charity gala appearances, watched the corporate golden boy unravel in real time. Whispers broke out among the diners. Cell phones were discreetly raised to record the confrontation. Marcus stood up, his sheer panic overriding his need for social decorum. He reached across the table and grabbed her forearm, his grip desperate and tight. "Shut your mouth right now," he hissed, his charming facade peeling away to reveal the desperate cornered animal underneath. "You are causing a scene. You are going to ruin everything. If you expose me, you go down with me. You signed those papers. You are an accessory. They will lock you up too." Chloe looked down at his hand gripping her arm. The last trace of her naive devotion vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated survival instinct. She realized the man standing before her was not a protector. He was an anchor tied to her neck. She grabbed her heavy crystal water goblet from the table. Without a single second of hesitation, she hurled the freezing ice-filled water directly into his face. Marcus recoiled, gasping in shock as the icy water drenched his custom shirt and dripped humiliatingly from his nose and chin. He released her arm instantly, staggering backward as the ice cubes clattered loudly against the floor. Just then, Marcus' smartphone lit up on the table between them, vibrating violently against the wood. The caller ID flashed brightly for both of them to see. It was Sylvia. His mother was calling, undoubtedly to manage the ongoing crisis, to demand updates, to exert her suffocating matriarchal control over his collapsing life. Chloe looked down at the ringing phone, listening to the incessant buzzing. Then she looked back up at the dripping, pathetic man standing before her. She straightened her posture, her expression turning terrifyingly cold and calculated. "I am not pregnant, Marcus," she announced, her voice ringing out with crystal clarity so the entire restaurant could hear her. Marcus froze, the water dripping from his jaw completely forgotten. He stared at her, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. The one piece of leverage he thought he held over his family, the heir he thought would secure his mother unconditional support, was a lie. "I faked the ultrasound to get a ring." Chloe continued, delivering the final fatal blow without a single shred of remorse. "I thought I was securing a bag with a wealthy, powerful man. But since you are completely broke, and since you tried to destroy my financial future to save your own skin, we are officially done. I am taking the generous severance package your wife offered me yesterday. I am taking her money, and I am going to testify against you in federal court." She turned on her heel and marched out of the restaurant, leaving Marcus dripping destroyed and entirely alone while the ringing phone continued to buzz relentlessly on the table. I tapped a single button on the polished wood console of the pulpit. Instantly, the three massive LED screens suspended behind the choir loft went entirely black. The sudden darkness swallowed Sylvia's hypocritical tears and silenced the murmurs of the thousands of attendees packed into the sanctuary. A heartbeat later, the screens flared back to life in blinding high-resolution clarity. They did not display a serene scripture verse or a picturesque sunrise to accompany her sermon. They displayed forensic bank statements, highlighted wire transfers, and damning corporate ledgers. A collective vibrating gasp echoed through the cavernous room. Thousands of eyes darted from the glaring red numbers on the screens to my face. I stepped around Sylvia, ignoring her stunned, open-mouthed expression, and smoothly pulled the primary microphone from its heavy brass stand. "My mother spoke to you this morning about forgiveness." I projected my voice, ringing out with absolute unwavering authority, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings of the megachurch. "She spoke to you about family trials, about standing by the ones you love, and about the grace of God. But before we can talk about forgiveness, let us speak about accountability." I clicked a small remote in my hand, transitioning the screens to a meticulously organized financial flowchart. The bright graphics clearly mapped out the illicit movement of funds for anyone in the pews to read. "You were told that the $2.5 million community outreach grant was delayed due to state bureaucracy," I announced to the captivated crowd. "You were told the funds meant for the new youth center and the downtown women's shelter were tied up in red tape. You gave your hard-earned tithes week after week, believing you were funding a mission of grace. That was a lie." I clicked to the next slide. A massive, undeniably authentic banking document appeared. "This is a direct routing slip from Greater Grace Cathedral primary holding account," I explained, pacing the length of the altar so every section of the congregation could see my face. "It shows a transfer of $800,000 directly into a shell company. A shell company controlled by Marcus Washington and his brother-in-law, Brent." The congregation erupted into a cacophony of shocked whispers and angry mutters. Down in the front row, I saw Jada physically recoil, her sharp legal mind instantly recognizing the severity of the federal crimes projected at 50 feet wide. Marcus, standing just steps behind his mother, lost all the color in his face. His carefully constructed mask of a repentant saint shattered into pure, unadulterated terror. He lunged forward as if to grab the microphone from my hand, but the sheer volume of the crowd roaring in confusion forced him to freeze in his tracks. He was trapped in the blinding spotlight. I did not give them a single second to recover. I clicked the remote again. Two massive invoices appeared side by side on the screens. "This is where your tithes, your offerings, and your community grants actually went," I declared, raising my voice to cut through the rising noise. $400,000 funneled directly into Brent, failing downtown real estate development to keep his construction company from defaulting. Another $200,000 spent on a luxury sports car and a high-end apartment lease for Marcus, 24-year-old Mistress. The sanctuary absolutely exploded. Women in the pews stood up shouting in disbelief and pointing at the screen. Deacons frantically exchanged terrified glances, completely unsure of how to contain the riot brewing inside the holy walls. Sylvia gripped the edges of the pulpit, her knuckles turning white, her knees visibly buckling under the weight of her public destruction. Her perfect, untouchable matriarchal image was burning to ash right in front of her devoted congregation. She tried to speak, tried to summon her commanding spiritual voice to shut me down, but her microphone feed had already been bypassed by my flash drive. She was entirely voiceless. "You trusted this family," I continued, my voice slicing through the chaos like a blade of ice. "You trusted Sylvia Washington when she stood on this very altar and told you I was a mentally unstable woman who kidnapped her grandchild. You believed her when she said I was having a psychotic break. But mathematics do not suffer from hysteria, and bank ledgers do not experience paranoid delusions. The only delusion in this building is the belief that the Washington family is above the law." Suddenly, heavy, frantic footsteps pounded up the altar stairs. Head Elder Thomas, a man who had served as Sylvia's fiercest protector and enforcer for over a decade, stormed the platform. His face was flushed crimson with rage, the veins in his neck bulging as he signaled frantically to the sound booth at the back of the sanctuary. "Cut the audio," Elder Thomas bellowed, waving his arms wildly at the sound technicians who were frozen in shock. He turned to the congregation, attempting to project his booming voice over the massive uproar. "Do not listen to this woman. This is an attack from the enemy. She is a bitter, lying woman trying to destroy the house of the Lord with fabricated documents. Security, remove her from this altar immediately." Two large security guards at the base of the stairs hesitated, looking up at the glaring financial records on the screens, clearly unsure of whether they should intervene or stand down. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I straightened my tailored designer blazer, squared my shoulders, and looked Head Elder Thomas directly in the eye. I raised the microphone back to my lips. "Am I lying, Elder Thomas?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, carrying a deadly frequency that commanded absolute silence from the stunned crowd. I clicked the remote one final time. The three LED screens shifted simultaneously, displaying a single unmistakable digital bank receipt. Because this slide shows a $50,000 wire transfer originating from Marcus' offshore account deposited directly into your personal Cayman Islands trust to keep you quiet. The silence that followed my question lasted for exactly 3 seconds. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that occurs right before a massive structural collapse. Elder Thomas stood frozen at the edge of the altar, his arms still raised toward the sound booth, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. He stared at the massive LED screen, projecting his personal banking details to the entire congregation of Greater Grace Cathedral. The Cayman Islands Trust account number was highlighted in bright yellow, a glowing beacon of his absolute corruption. Then the sanctuary shattered. It did not start with a murmur. It started with a collective, deafening roar of pure outrage. 5,000 parishioners, people who had tithed their hard-earned money, who had trusted this leadership with their spiritual and financial lives, erupted into absolute pandemonium. The sound was deafening, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows. Women in the front pews stood up, pointing fingers and screaming demands for their money back. Deacons who had blindly followed Elder Thomas for years physically backed away from him, their faces twisting in horror and disgust. The carefully orchestrated reverence of the Sunday service was instantly replaced by the raw, volatile energy of a betrayed mob. I stood perfectly still in the center of the altar, holding my baby securely against my chest. My child slept peacefully, completely oblivious to the empire crumbling around us. I did not raise my voice again. I did not need to. The documents on the screens were doing all the screaming for me. Sylvia Washington had spent decades building an untouchable persona. She was the pristine matriarch, the spiritual guide, the woman who commanded respect with a single glance. But as the full weight of the exposure hit her, that entire facade disintegrated. She looked out at the angry faces of her congregation, the people she had manipulated and bled dry, and realized there was no sermon powerful enough to save her this time. The financial records were undeniable. The fraud was absolute. Her breath hitched violently. Her eyes rolled back. For years, Sylvia had perfected the art of the dramatic, theatrical swoon to garner sympathy during intense sermons. But this time, there was no acting involved. The sheer terror of public ruin and impending criminal charges short-circuited her system. Her knees buckled beneath her tailored Sunday suit. She collapsed, hitting the polished mahogany floor of the altar with a heavy, sickening thud. In the past, a dozen ushers would have rushed forward to catch her, to fan her face, to offer her water and prayers. Today, no one moved to help her. The congregation was too busy staring at the evidence of her thievery. She lay there on the expensive wood, completely ignored by the empire she had built. Brent realized the gravity of the situation seconds before anyone else. He was a businessman who knew exactly what offshore wire fraud meant when projected in front of 5,000 witnesses. It meant federal prison. While the congregation screamed and Sylvia lay unconscious on the floor, Brent slipped into pure survival mode. He did not check on his mother-in-law. He did not look at his brother-in-law. He slowly backed away from the pulpit, keeping his head down as he melted into the shadows of the choir loft. He turned and practically sprinted down the narrow carpeted side corridor that led to the private pastoral suites. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket with shaking hands, frantically dialing his white-collar criminal defense attorney. He hit the heavy side exit door, desperate to reach his luxury car and disappear before the local authorities could be called. He was a coward, abandoning a sinking ship, leaving his family to drown in the flood they had created together. Marcus was entirely trapped. He stood paralyzed near the grand piano, watching the absolute destruction of his life unfold in real time. The golden boy of Atlanta was now the most hated man in the room. Parishioners in the front rows were shouting his name, throwing their Sunday programs onto the floor in disgust. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and sheer terror. He finally understood that my silence over the past few weeks was not submission. It was preparation. Panic seized him. The charming, arrogant man who had tried to leave me with nothing was reduced to a frightened animal looking for an escape route. He abandoned his unconscious mother on the floor. He turned his back on the angry congregation and bolted. He shoved his way through the tiered rows of the choir loft. The robed singers physically recoiled from him, pulling their garments away as if his corruption was contagious. Marcus knocked over heavy metal music stands, the brass clattering loudly against the risers. He did not stop to apologize. His breathing was ragged, his tailored suit jacket flapping wildly as he bounded down the back stairs and burst into the rear vestibule of the megachurch. He sprinted down the long, marble-lined hallway, his expensive leather shoes slipping frantically against the polished stone. He could hear the muffled roar of the angry congregation behind him, a sound that spurred him to run faster. He just needed to get to his car. He just needed to get out of the building and figure out a way to spin the narrative, a way to blame his business partners, a way to survive. He reached the massive, heavy wooden double doors at the very back of the cathedral. He threw his entire body weight against the brass crash bars, shoving the doors open and bursting out into the bright, humid Atlanta morning air. He expected to find the quiet VIP parking lot. He expected to find his waiting sports car. Instead, he was instantly blinded by an ocean of violently flashing red and blue lights. Marcus stumbled to a halt, throwing his hands up to shield his eyes from the glare. The entire rear parking lot of Greater Grace Cathedral was locked down. A dozen unmarked black SUVs and heavily armored vehicles formed an impenetrable barricade. This was not a local police response to a church disturbance. More than 20 federal agents stood waiting in the morning sun. They were heavily armed, their faces set in grim, unyielding expressions. They wore dark tactical gear with 3 massive yellow letters emblazoned clearly across the back of their Kevlar vests. FBI. They were not here because of a family dispute. They were not here because of a messy divorce. The forensic audit I had quietly handed over to the authorities 18 days ago had triggered a massive federal response. They were here for multiple counts of aggravated wire fraud, grand larceny, and federal tax evasion. Marcus Washington dropped to his knees on the concrete, the flashing lights reflecting in his terrified, ruined eyes. The red and blue lights washing over Marcus Washington in the church parking lot were just the opening salvo of a much larger, highly coordinated federal sweep. While Marcus was being read his rights and forcefully guided into the back of an armored SUV, a secondary team of agents had already intercepted Brent. He never even made it to his luxury car. They tackled him against the brick wall of the church alleyway, slapping heavy steel cuffs on his wrists, while he frantically screamed for a lawyer who would never answer his call. The federal net had been cast with absolute precision, dragging the untouchable Washington men straight into the unforgiving reality of the criminal justice system. The news hit the Atlanta legal and corporate circuits before the Sunday evening broadcasts even aired. The fallout was instantaneous, radioactive, and entirely uncontainable. By Monday morning, Jada Washington walked into the towering glass and steel high-rise of her elite corporate law firm, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality waiting for her on the 42nd floor. She was dressed in her usual armor of a razor-sharp designer suit, and immaculate stilettos holding her chin high with the trademark arrogance she had wielded like a weapon her entire life. She believed her husband and brother being arrested was a temporary setback, a gross misunderstanding that her high-powered legal connections could easily squash before lunchtime. She believed she was insulated from their stupidity. She walked into the senior partner's conference room expecting a strategy meeting. Instead, she walked into her own professional execution. The managing partner of the firm did not offer her a seat. He simply stood at the head of the massive glass table, flanked by the firm general counsel and two stern-faced compliance officers. Without a word of greeting, he slid a thick-bound federal subpoena across the smooth glass directly toward her. Jada picked up the document, her perfectly manicured fingers turning the first page. Her eyes scanned the dense legal text, and within seconds, the color completely drained from her face. Her sharp, analytical mind pieced the puzzle together with horrifying clarity. Brent had not just stolen the money. He needed a legally binding, ironclad structure to launder it through the offshore accounts. To do that without raising red flags at the bank, he needed the authorization of a senior corporate attorney. He had used her name. He had forged her digital signature. He had stamped the fraudulent shell company and corporation documents with her official state notary seal. Jada's breath hitched in her throat as the room started to spin. She was completely implicated. Her husband had tied her directly to a multi-million-dollar federal embezzlement and wire fraud conspiracy. She tried to speak to claim ignorance, to desperately explain that Brent had stolen her credentials without her knowledge, but the managing partner held up a hand to silence her. He informed her coldly that the firm would not tolerate a microscopic shred of association with federal tax evasion. She was a public relations nightmare, a walking liability that threatened the pristine reputation of the entire institution. They stripped her of her senior partner badge on the spot. Security guards were waiting outside the glass doors. They did not even allow her to return to her corner office to collect her personal belongings. Jada Washington, one of the most feared and arrogant corporate lawyers in the city, was escorted out of the lobby in front of her peers, interns, and assistants, like a common criminal. The downward spiral accelerated with terrifying speed. By Tuesday afternoon, the federal government froze every single joint asset attached to the Washington family. Jada Platinum credit cards were declined at the grocery store. Her personal banking apps displayed zero available balances. The massive suburban estate she shared with Brent was placed under federal lien. In less than 48 hours, her entire identity, her wealth, her status, and her untouchable pride had completely evaporated. She was facing the very real, very imminent threat of federal prison time, and she had absolutely zero capital to hire a defense attorney. With her mother hospitalized from the shock, her brother in federal holding, and her husband sitting in a jail cell after betraying her, Jada had run out of allies. She had only one option left. She had to swallow her immense, suffocating pride and go to the only person in Atlanta who possessed the financial power, the clean legal standing, and the leverage to save her. My maternal wellness agency occupied the entire top floor of a pristine, sunlight-flooded building in Buckhead. The atmosphere was a sanctuary of calm-smelling, faintly of lavender and eucalyptus, designed to offer absolute peace to the elite mothers who utilized my services. My assistant opened the heavy oak door to my private executive suite, her expression a mixture of concern and distaste. She stepped aside, allowing Jada to enter. The woman standing in my doorway was a ghost of the arrogant predator who had stormed into the bank trying to freeze my assets just a few weeks prior. Jada looked entirely defeated. Her hair was pulled into a messy, frantic knot. She wore a wrinkled trench coat over plain clothes, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from 2 days of nonstop crying and unimaginable stress. She looked small, fragile, and utterly broken. I sat behind my massive, polished white marble desk, my posture relaxed, my expression perfectly serene. I folded my hands together and simply watched her unravel. Jada stumbled forward, gripping the edge of my desk as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. The tears spilled over her eyelashes, rolling down her cheeks as she completely abandoned her pride. "Zuri, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with raw desperation. "I have nothing left." The firm fired me. The feds took everything. Brent set me up. He used my credentials, and I am going to lose my law license. I am going to prison. You know the truth. You have the audit. You can tell the federal prosecutors I had nothing to do with the shell companies. Please, I need a loan for a defense attorney. We are family. You have to help me. I am begging you. She stood there weeping openly, waiting for the innate kindness she had always mocked to save her. She expected my empathy to override my memory. I looked at Jada maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. My mind flashed back to the very first family dinner after Marcus and I were married. I remembered the condescending smirk on her face. I remembered the exact tone of her voice when she looked down her nose at my business plan, laughing as she swirled her expensive wine and called me a glorified babysitter who would never understand the complexities of real corporate success. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger. I reached into the deep bottom drawer of my marble desk and pulled out a folded bundle of dark blue fabric. I placed it on the pristine surface. On top of the fabric, I set a heavy ring of brass utility keys. I slid the bundled janitor uniform directly across the polished marble until it stopped right in front of her trembling hands. I pointed to the supply closet, visible through the glass wall of my suite, where a yellow bucket and a commercial mop stood waiting. I have an opening for a night shift cleaner, I said, my voice echoing with cold, absolute finality. That is the only support you will get from me. The stark clinical environment of the federal holding facility was a brutal departure from the gilded halls of Greater Grace Cathedral. The air inside Interrogation Room A was kept deliberately freezing, yet sweat poured profusely down Marcus Washington's neck, soaking into the collar of his ruined $3,000 bespoke suit. The claustrophobic walls were painted a dull institutional gray, offering absolutely nothing to distract from the heavy, suffocating reality of his situation. He sat at a bolted-down steel table facing two veteran FBI agents who stared at him with eyes entirely immune to his trademark megachurch charisma. Marcus was scrambling his mind, operating at a frantic, desperate pace. He flashed a brilliant, practiced smile, attempting to lean forward and establish a conspiratorial man-to-man rapport with the lead agent. He adjusted his cuffs, trying to project the image of a reasonable, deeply misunderstood community leader caught in an unfortunate clerical error. Gentlemen, we all know how complicated large-scale nonprofit finances can get. Marcus began, his voice dripping with smooth, practiced modulation. He kept his tone low, attempting to sound like a victim of circumstance. I am a spiritual leader, not a forensic accountant. I preach the gospel. I counsel the broken. I leave the complex structural logistics to the businessmen in our family circle. The lead agent did not blink. He simply tapped a pen against a thick stack of printed wire transfer logs. Marcus saw that the charm offensive was failing completely. Without missing a single beat, he abandoned his loyalty and immediately pivoted to a vicious, calculated betrayal. He decided to throw his brother-in-law directly into the sacrificial fire. You need to be looking at Brent, Marcus stated, lowering his voice into a hushed, serious register. Brent is the real estate developer. Brent is the one who understands corporate shell structures and offshore tax havens. He came to me with a plan to maximize our community outreach grants through aggressive reinvestment. I trusted him. He is family. I just signed where he told me to sign. He used his wife's legal credentials to bypass our internal compliance checks. He manipulated my trust, gentlemen. He orchestrated this entire financial maze behind my back, and now he is trying to leave me holding the bag. Meanwhile, just 30 feet down the sterile hallway in Interrogation Room B, a very different, far less composed performance was taking place. Brent was falling apart at the seams. He had stripped off his designer silk tie, and his expensive dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. His face was splotchy, deeply flushed with a mixture of terror and severe hyperventilation. He was not trying to be smooth or charismatic. He was weeping openly, large, unashamed tears of pure cowardice rolling down his cheeks as he frantically tried to save his own skin. I just build houses, Brent sobbed, his voice cracking as he leaned across the steel table toward his interrogators. I swing hammers. I pour concrete. I do not know the first thing about Cayman Island trust accounts or federal wire routing. Marcus is the mastermind. Marcus and his mother Sylvia, they control everything in that church. They control the money, they control the board, and they controlled me. Brent wiped his nose with the back of his trembling hand, his eyes wide with desperate panic. He pointed a shaking finger at the blank wall as if pointing directly at Marcus in the next room. "Marcus threatened me," Brent cried, escalating his frantic defense. "He told me that if I did not sign those shell company documents, he would use his influence to permanently cut my construction firm off from all the municipal contracts in Atlanta. He promised me the paperwork was completely legal. He swore his sister Jada had approved it all. I was intimidated. I was scared for my business. I am just an ignorant contractor who got bullied by a powerful, greedy family. I will tell you everything they did. Just please, you have to protect me from them." Back in interrogation room. Marcus leaned back in his hard metal chair. He took a slow, deep breath, mistakenly believing his performance had landed. He thought he had successfully planted the seeds of reasonable doubt. He thought he had muddied the waters just enough to secure bail, confident that his expensive, high-powered legal team would eventually untangle the mess and pin the entire federal conspiracy squarely on Brent. He offered the lead agent a final confident nod, ready to demand his phone call. The lead federal agent finally stopped tapping his pen. He looked at Marcus with an expression of profound, chilling boredom. He reached down into his battered leather briefcase resting on the floor and pulled out a digital tablet enclosed in a heavy, shock-proof black case. The agent slid the tablet across the cold steel surface. It came to a stop just inches from Marcus' handcuffed wrists. "I think you should see something before you finalize your official statement." "Mr. Washington," the agent said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. The screen illuminated brightly. Marcus looked down. The blood instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. The confident, arrogant spark in his eyes died, completely replaced by pure, bottomless horror. The video playing on the screen was time-stamped from early that morning, filmed in a sterile FBI field office. Sitting at a table identical to the one Marcus was currently chained to was Chloe. His 24-year-old mistress looked completely unbothered. Her posture relaxed, her expression vindictive and sharp. She was looking directly at the camera, speaking clearly, and answering an unseen agent questions with absolute cooperative precision. But it was not just her presence that caused the air to physically leave Marcus' lungs. It was what she was holding in her hands. In the video, Chloe pushed a small silver solid-state external hard drive across the table. Marcus' heart stopped beating. He recognized that specific drive instantly. It was the master digital ledger. It contained the raw, unencrypted spreadsheets of his offshore transfers, the hidden church bank accounts, the blackmail payments to Elder Thomas, and the explicit digital blueprints of his entire embezzlement empire. It was the only tangible proof that tied him directly to the masterminding of the fraud. He had taken a heavy steel hammer to what he thought was that exact drive 3 weeks ago in his garage. He had smashed it into tiny, unrecognizable fragments and thrown the plastic debris directly into the Chattahoochee River to destroy the evidence. As he watched the video play, the devastating truth crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing building. Chloe had swapped it. She had watched him panic. She had anticipated his eventual downfall, and she had quietly replaced the real hard drive with a dummy duplicate. She had kept the genuine damning evidence as her ultimate insurance policy, and she had just handed it directly to the federal government in exchange for full, unconditional immunity. The agent reached out and tapped the screen, pausing the video, right on Chloe's triumphant, smiling face. He looked up, meeting Marcus' wide, terrified eyes. "With this hard drive and her full cooperation, you are not looking at bail, Marcus. You are looking at a mandatory, non-negotiable 15 years in federal prison." The swift and brutal efficiency of the federal government is a terrifying thing to witness when you are on the wrong side of it. With Marcus and Brent secured in federal holding, their arrogant denials crushed by the weight of Chloe cooperation, the Department of Justice turned its massive, unblinking eye toward the physical assets of the Washington family. The dominoes I had meticulously lined up were now falling with deafening speed. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division did not send polite letters or schedule courteous meetings. They arrived unannounced in a fleet of black SUVs and heavy moving trucks, armed with federal seizure warrants and an absolute zero-tolerance policy for megachurch theatrics. The synchronized raids hit every property tied to the fraudulent shell companies simultaneously. I watched the live news coverage from the quiet sanctuary of my Buckhead office, sipping chamomile tea as helicopters circled the various Atlanta properties. Tow trucks hauled away the fleet of identical matte black Mercedes SUVs the family used to commute to the cathedral. The luxury sports car Marcus had bought for Chloe, the one funded entirely by the community outreach grant, was impounded. Downtown federal agents carried dozens of heavy cardboard boxes out of the church administrative wing, loading decades of corrupt financial records into secure transport vehicles. But the ultimate prize, the crown jewel of my mother's lifelong vanity, was her personal residence. Sylvia Washington's sprawling 12,000-square-foot estate in the wealthiest zip code of the city was a monument built entirely on the backs of her working-class congregation. The wrought iron gates, custom forged with a massive looping W, swung open not for a prestigious charity gala, but for a dozen armed federal agents. They marched up the pristine circular driveway, bypassing the imported Italian marble fountains, and walked straight through the custom mahogany double doors. According to the federal asset forfeiture logs, Sylvia tried to resist. When the agents entered her grand foyer, she attempted to summon the booming, untouchable pastoral voice she used to command thousands from the pulpit. She ordered them out of her house, threatening them with the wrath of God and her high-powered legal connections. The lead IRS agent simply handed her a crisp, heavily stamped document. It detailed the immediate seizure of the property which had been illegally leveraged against the church's stolen outreach funds. Her holy indignation meant absolutely nothing to the federal government. They gave Sylvia Washington exactly 15 minutes to pack a single suitcase of personal necessities. She was expressly forbidden from taking any jewelry, any artwork, any designer furs, or any luxury goods purchased with the embezzled church funds. The pristine, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta elite society was reduced to frantically shoving basic toiletries and a few plain outfits into a standard canvas carry-on bag. The local news cameras captured the exact moment she was escorted out of the front doors. The footage was broadcast live across every local channel. Sylvia looked entirely unrecognizable. Her perfectly styled, expensive wig was slightly skewed, shifting off-center in her panicked haste. Her flawless, camera-ready makeup was completely ruined. Dark, heavy rivers of expensive mascara ran down her cheeks, carving jagged lines into her foundation. She stumbled down her own front steps, her knees visibly shaking, clutching the handle of her cheap suitcase like a lifeline. The most devastating blow to her pride was not the federal agents flanking her. It was the audience. Her wealthy elite neighbors, the judges, politicians, and corporate executives she had spent decades trying to impress, stood on their manicured lawns watching her public humiliation in stunned silence. The mask of black excellence and spiritual superiority she had worn her entire life was violently ripped away, exposing the greedy common thief trembling underneath. The heavy federal padlocks clicked shut on the mahogany doors of her mansion, locking her out of her own kingdom forever. An hour later, my personal cell phone vibrated on my pristine white marble desk. The caller ID flashed with Sylvia's personal number. I did not answer. I simply set the phone down and let the call go directly to voicemail. A minute later, the red notification light blinked. I pressed play, turning the speakerphone on so her voice filled the quiet space of my office. The sound that came out of the speaker was not the measured, manipulative tone of a megachurch pastor. It was the raw, unhinged screeching of a woman who had just watched her entire universe burn to ash. "You did this!" Sylvia screamed into the phone, her voice cracking and breaking with venomous guttural hatred. "You destroyed us. You burned down everything I built. I have nothing. The church is gone. Your brothers are in jail. They took my house. You are a demon Zuri. You are a bitter, evil, ungrateful mistake, and you ruined the Washington legacy. I curse the day I gave birth to you. I curse you." The voicemail ended with a sharp gasping sob and the heavy click of a disconnected line. I sat perfectly still listening to the silence that followed her feral screaming. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel fear. I felt the profound crystal clear peace of absolute justice. The Washington legacy was a disease, a parasitic infection that had fed on vulnerable people for decades, and I was the cure. I tapped the screen of my phone, deleting the voicemail permanently. I looked up at the man sitting across the desk from me. He was a senior federal bankruptcy attorney, acting as the official liaison for the Department of Justice Asset Liquidation Division. He pushed a thick stack of heavy watermarked legal documents across the marble surface toward me. I picked up my gold-plated fountain pen. I smoothly signed my name on the bottom line of the final page, pressing the ink deeply into the paper. I was not just signing a standard contract. I was signing the official property deed to Sylvia Foreclosed 12,000-square-foot mansion. Because the estate had been seized in a federal racketeering case and required immediate liquidation to pay back the defrauded community grants, I had purchased it through a blind LLC at a closed federal auction for absolute pennies on the dollar. The attorney stamped the documents with a heavy seal, nodding respectfully. "The property is officially yours." "Ms. Washington," he said, gathering his files, "do you have plans for the estate? The zoning board mentioned you requested a commercial variance." I smiled, sliding my copy of the deed into my leather briefcase. "I do," I replied, my voice steady and bright. "I am gutting the interior completely. I am transforming the entire property into a secure, fully funded sanctuary and shelter for abused single mothers. It will be a place where women who have been discarded, manipulated, and told they are nothing can rebuild their lives in absolute safety." I stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, looking out over the city skyline. I had taken the grandest monument of my mother greed and turned it into the ultimate instrument of grace. The Washington Empire was dead, but mine was just beginning. 6 weeks later, the soothing scent of lavender and eucalyptus from my office was entirely replaced by the harsh chemical odor of industrial bleach inside the Federal Family Court Mediation Center. The room was aggressively sterile. There were no windows, no mahogany paneling, and no plush carpets to absorb the tension. It was a suffocating cinder-block box designed to strip away vanity and leave only the cold, hard facts of the law. I sat at one side of the bolted-down metal table, dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored white suit. I wore diamond studs at my ears and a vintage timepiece that cost more than Marcus' first car. I was the picture of absolute unbothered power. The heavy steel door at the far end of the room clanked loudly as the deadbolt disengaged. The sound of thick, heavy chains dragging across the linoleum floor echoed in the tight, claustrophobic space. Marcus was led into the room by 2 armed federal marshals. The sight of him was jarring. The charismatic, untouchable prince of Greater Grace Cathedral had been entirely erased. He was drowning in a bright orange jail-issued jumpsuit that hung loosely off his diminishing frame. He had lost at least 15 pounds since the raid, the stress of federal holding eating away at his muscle. His perfectly manicured fade was growing out in uneven graying patches. The designer Italian loafers he used to brag about were replaced by cheap, bright orange plastic shower sandals. But it was his posture that told the real story. He was hunched over, his shoulders curved inward, his spirit utterly broken by the brutal reality of the criminal justice system. The marshals guided him to the metal chair opposite mine. They secured the heavy chain around his waist to a steel loop bolted directly into the floor, leaving his hands just free enough to hold a pen. He sat down heavily, the metal chair scraping against the floor. He did not look at me. He stared down at his chained wrists, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths, sweat already pooling at the collar of his uniform. My high-powered divorce attorney, a brilliant shark of a woman who charged $1,000 an hour, sat to my right. Next to Marcus sat a severely overworked public defender who looked like he had not slept in 3 days. Because the federal government had seized every single asset, frozen every bank account, and liquidated every property attached to the Washington name under the RICO Act, Marcus had absolutely no money left to hire private counsel. The man who used to fly first class on the stolen tithes of his congregation was now relying entirely on the state for his legal survival. The court-appointed mediator cleared his throat, placing a thick stack of legal documents in the center of the metal table. "These are the final dissolution decrees," the mediator stated, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "Mr. Washington, as we discussed in the preliminary hearings, you are forfeiting all claims to any and all marital assets. Given the federal seizure of your joint properties and your impending criminal sentencing, there is no alimony, no division of the maternal wellness agency, and no financial restitution to be awarded to you. You are leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing." Marcus swallowed hard, the sound loud and pathetic in the quiet room. He finally lifted his head and looked at me. His bright blue eyes, the ones that had once charmed thousands from the pulpit and convinced me to trust him, were bloodshot and brimming with tears. He searched my face desperately, looking for a flicker of the naive, accommodating woman he had married. He was looking for mercy. He found a wall of solid ice. "Zuri." "Please," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. He leaned forward as far as the chains would allow, the metal links rattling aggressively against the table. "I know I messed up. I know I let the greed blind me and I let Brent manipulate the accounts. But you do not have to do this so coldly. We built a life together. We stood before God and made vows. Do not leave me with absolutely nothing. I am terrified in there, Zuri. You have no idea what it is like in a federal cell. Just show me a little grace." My attorney shifted in her seat, preparing to shut him down and remind him of the legal parameters of the meeting. But I held up a single manicured finger to silence her. I looked at the man who had tried to steal my business, who had gaslit me into thinking I was suffering from postpartum psychosis, who had watched his mother attempt to kidnap my child without lifting a finger to stop her. "Grace is a currency. Your family bankrupt a long time ago, Marcus," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and completely void of empathy. "Sign the papers." A fresh wave of tears spilled over his eyelashes, cutting tracks through the grime and sweat on his face. He realized the manipulation was useless. The charm was dead. He was entirely out of options. His hands shook violently as the public defender slid a cheap plastic pen across the table toward him. Marcus picked it up. He stared at the signature line for a long, agonizing moment, his chest heaving with deep, ragged sobs. He placed the pen to the paper and signed away the last remaining piece of his former life. The mediator quickly pulled the documents away, applying the official state seal to the final page. The divorce was absolute and legally binding. As the marshal stepped forward to detach his waist chain from the floor ring to transport him back to his cell, Marcus broke down completely. He openly wept, the sound echoing pathetically off the cinder-block walls, his shoulders shaking with the force of his devastation. He looked up at me one last time, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated agony. "Please, Zuri," he begged, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch as the marshals grabbed his arms and hoisted him to his feet. "Just let me hold Nia once. Just bring her to the visitor room for 5 minutes. I am her father. Please let me see my baby." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I stood up slowly from the metal table, smoothing the immaculate lines of my tailored white suit. I radiated absolute, untouchable power. The victory I had engineered over the last few months settled into my bones as I looked at the ruined man in front of me. I stared directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes, my own eyes cold and entirely unforgiving. "You surrendered your parental rights the minute you became a convicted felon, Marcus. You will never see her, you will never know her, and she will have my last name. You have 18 days to appeal, but we both know you can't afford a stamp, let alone a lawyer." I turned on my heel and walked out of the mediation room without waiting to watch the marshals drag him away. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, sealing Marcus inside his new permanent reality. I stepped out of the federal courthouse and into the blinding Atlanta sunlight. The air tasted distinctly like freedom. I slid my designer sunglasses over my eyes, ignoring the frantic shouting of the local press gathered on the courthouse steps, and climbed into the back of my waiting town car. The destruction phase of my grand strategy was officially complete. The earth was scorched, the parasites were removed, and the slate was entirely clean. It was time to build. The transformation of my maternal wellness agency was rapid, aggressive, and fueled by the capital I had meticulously protected from Brent and his predatory shell companies. I stripped away every last trace of the Washington family influence. The old branding, with its soft, accommodating pastel colors designed to look unthreatening to my mother, was entirely discarded. In its place rose a sleek, modern corporate identity that commanded absolute respect in the medical technology sector. My calendar became a ruthless blur of high-stakes board meetings, venture capital pitches, and international flights. I worked 18-hour days driven by a relentless, burning desire to permanently solidify my financial independence. The crowning achievement of my professional reinvention arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Thames in London. I sat across from the executive board of Europe's largest private healthcare syndicate. They did not know or care about megachurch scandals, corrupt pastors, or Atlanta elite society gossip. They only cared about the proprietary maternal health tracking software my company had developed. I delivered a flawless presentation, dismantled their counteroffers with absolute precision, and signed a binding international distribution contract worth $40 million before my morning coffee had even cooled. I was no longer a local entrepreneur fighting for scraps and validation at my family dinner table. I was a global titan. With my corporate empire secured and my personal wealth growing exponentially, I turned my attention back to the city and the community my mother had ruthlessly exploited for decades. I did not want my name plastered on a gaudy cathedral or etched into a vanity project. I wanted tangible generational impact. A month later, I stood at a polished wooden podium on the historic campus of Spelman College, looking out at a sea of brilliant, ambitious young women. I announced the immediate establishment of the Nia Sanctuary Endowment. It was a $10 million trust specifically designed to provide full-ride academic scholarships, premium on-campus childcare, and comprehensive housing stipends for single mothers pursuing advanced degrees in STEM fields. I shook hands with the college president as flashbulbs illuminated the packed auditorium. I was doing exactly what Sylvia Washington had always pretended to do. I was actually lifting vulnerable women out of poverty, instead of weaponizing their tithes to finance a fleet of luxury vehicles. I had become the true, unassailable pillar of the community, and I had done it using the exact same fortune they had tried to steal from me and my daughter. While my star ascended into the stratosphere, the grim, crushing weight of the federal justice system settled heavily onto the people who had tried to ruin me. The contrast was cinematic in its absolute cruelty. Inside the suffocating, windowless walls of the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, the former prince of Greater Grace Cathedral was learning the true meaning of submission. Marcus gripped a heavy industrial string mop, his hands blistered and raw from the harsh chemical bleach. The flickering fluorescent lights illuminated the stark, faded orange of his uniform as he pushed dirty, soapy water across the cracked concrete floor of the cell block cafeteria. A corrections officer barked an aggressive order at him, and Marcus immediately flinched his posture, subservient, his spirit entirely broken by the daily indignities of federal time. 3 states away in a low-security federal camp, Brent was faring even worse. He stood in a crowded, noisy recreation room, desperately clutching a grimy prison payphone to his ear. He was weeping openly, large tears of profound cowardice sliding down his unshaven face as he begged a former construction buddy to put $20 on his commissary account. The buddy cursed him out and hung up the phone, leaving Brent to listen to the dial tone in terrified isolation. Back in Atlanta, the consequences of corporate fraud had permanently destroyed Jada. Stripped of her prestigious legal credentials and blacklisted by every financial institution and law firm in the state, the former compliance officer was reduced to working the customer service desk at a massive discount retail chain. She wore an ill-fitting polyester vest and a cheap plastic name tag. A furious, entitled customer screamed directly in her face over an expired manufacturer coupon, demanding to see a manager. Jada simply stood there, forced to swallow her legendary arrogant pride and apologize profusely just to keep her minimum wage job. But the most devastating poetic portrait of defeat belonged to Sylvia. The untouchable matriarch who once entertained politicians and celebrities in a gilded 12,000-square-foot mansion now lived in a cramped 300-square-foot studio apartment in a decaying building on the industrial outskirts of the city. The cheap wallpaper was peeling in thick yellowed strips. A leaky faucet dripped monotonously into a deeply stained porcelain sink. Sylvia sat alone in a worn second-hand armchair, wrapped in a faded threadbare bathrobe. She stared blankly at a small static-filled television screen, broadcasting a local low-budget church service. Her prepaid cell phone never rang. The sycophantic board members, the adoring congregation, and the wealthy elite who used to hang on her every word had completely abandoned her the moment her bank accounts were frozen. She was utterly isolated, suffocating in the moldy, forgotten reality she had so righteously earned. The brutal, pathetic reality of their existence was a universe away from the pristine, sun-drenched photography studio in Midtown Manhattan where I currently sat. A team of professional stylists buzzed around me, adjusting the collar of my bespoke emerald green suit and touching up my flawless makeup. A heavy professional camera lens was pointed directly at my face. I was sitting for the cover feature of Forbes magazine. The journalist, a sharp, observant woman holding a digital recorder, leaned forward in her chair. She looked down at her notes, reviewing my impressive resume, my thriving international company, and the massive philanthropic empire I had established in record time. "How did you find the strength to build all of this alone?" the interviewer asked, her pen poised over her notebook. I smiled, a predatory glimmer in my eye. "I found the strength in the exact place they tried to bury me," I replied, my voice smooth, modulated, and dangerously calm. The journalist leaned forward, completely captivated by the cold, undeniable conviction radiating from my posture. I gave her the polished corporate answers expected of a Forbes cover subject. I spoke about identifying market gaps in maternal health care, leveraging proprietary technology, and building an international supply chain. But beneath the carefully curated professional rhetoric, the true source of my relentless drive remained a private, heavily guarded triumph. The strength did not come from ambition alone. It was forged under the crushing, suffocating weight of absolute betrayal. When you are pushed to the very edge of a cliff with your infant daughter in your arms, you do not sit down and wait for someone to rescue you. You refuse to fall, and you build your wings on the way down using the bones of the people who tried to push you. The memory of that glittering Manhattan interview fades seamlessly into the quiet, magnificent reality of the present. The camera pulls back smoothly, transitioning from the harsh, rapid flashbulbs of the corporate photography studio to the warm, honeyed glow of a late Tuesday afternoon. We return to the exact same visual where this entire saga began. I am sitting in the center of my sprawling, dual-level penthouse, overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The frantic, desperate energy that once defined my life as a Washington wife is completely gone. In its place is a profound, unshakable stillness. I raise a delicate hand-painted porcelain teacup to my lips. The steam curls lazily into the perfectly conditioned air, carrying the faint, soothing scent of bergamot and honey. I take a slow, deliberate sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest, and lower the cup to the matching saucer with a soft, definitive clink. The camera performs a slow, continuous sweeping pull-out. As the frame steadily widens, the sheer staggering magnitude of my domain is revealed in exquisite detail. The custom-imported Italian marble floors stretch out like a flawless frozen sea. The curated collection of original contemporary art pieces hanging on the walls are worth more than Sylvia Washington's entire seized estate. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic, unobstructed view of the city I now quietly command. The lighting is immaculate, casting long, elegant shadows across the expensive modern furniture. There is no clutter. There is no chaos. There is only the absolute undeniable tranquility of a woman who has secured her empire. But the true wealth, the only asset that actually matters to me in this sprawling fortress of glass and stone, is resting just a few feet away. The widening camera angle captures a custom velvet bassinet resting in a warm pool of golden hour sunlight. Inside, my daughter Nia is sleeping soundly. Her chest rises and falls in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Her tiny hands are curled into relaxed fists. She is completely safe. She is entirely unbothered. She will never know the cold, calculating manipulation of her grandmother. She will never experience the toxic, suffocating vanity of her aunt and uncles. She will never recognize the broken, imprisoned man who contributed half her DNA. She knows only peace, abundance, and a mother who systematically burned a corrupt dynasty to the ground just to keep her warm. I look away from the sleeping baby and turn my gaze directly into the lens of the camera. I am not going to speak to you about the nobility of forgiveness. Society loves to demand immediate forgiveness from wronged women. The world expects us to turn the other cheek, to offer endless grace to the very people who actively tried to destroy us, to find a higher spiritual ground, and graciously let go of our righteous anger. The Washington family preached that exact brand of toxic, weaponized forgiveness from their megachurch pulpit every single Sunday. They demanded grace from their congregation while quietly robbing them blind. But I am not interested in the hollow performative comfort of forgiveness. I am interested in the absolute undeniable reality of consequence. Sylvia is currently sitting in a damp, moldy room, suffocating under the weight of her own irrelevance. Marcus is scrubbing prison floors, stripped of his custom suits and his megawatt smile, learning the bitter taste of submission. Brent and Jada are drowning in the mundane, grueling poverty they once openly mocked their own congregation for enduring. They preached about reaping and sowing for decades, but they somehow never believed the harvest would actually come for them. They are living exactly the lives they earned. They dug a massive, treacherous pit for me, and I simply stepped aside and watched them fall into it. They thought because I was quiet, I was weak. I maintain unblinking eye contact with the lens, my voice steady, resonant, and echoing with finality. They thought because I served mothers, I was a servant. They looked at my empathy and mistook it for stupidity. They looked at my patience and mistook it for compliance. They thought I was a prop in their grand production, a background character they could manipulate, discard, and ruin without a second thought. But they forgot that it takes a brutal kind of strength to bring life into this world, and an even more brutal strength to protect it. You do not threaten a mother's ability to feed, shelter, and protect her child and expect her to simply bow her head and weep. You ignite a primal, unstoppable force of nature. I did not just survive their attempts to ruin me. I did not just escape their sinking ship with my life. I didn't just burn their table down. I bought the building, evicted them, and built a castle on their ashes. I smile, a slow, genuine, terrifyingly serene expression of absolute victory, and lean back deeply into the plush velvet of my armchair. The golden sunlight catches the brilliant diamonds at my wrists and ears, flashing brightly in the quiet, peaceful room. And the best part? They handed me the matches. Checkmate.